Good morning, Commissioner Alam. I just want to do a quick sound check.
Good morning. I am on my phone, but I'm switching to my computer soon.
Okay, perfect. We are still waiting for at least one more commissioner to join. We do have Chair Howerton on the line already, but we do need a majority before we can get started. But I will definitely let you guys know when we have enough commissioners on. Commissioner Burns, I see that you've joined. I just want to make sure you're able to hear me.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, Monica. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And Commissioner Alam, I see that I think you're now on your computer. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. I switched over.
Okay, perfect. Chair Howerton, we do have a majority of the board on the line if you wanted to go ahead and get started. It is 10:36 and we are live on YouTube. I would just like to ask everyone to remain muted and keep your cameras off until you are presenting or if you are asking or responding to a question from the board.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Monica, for managing our starting late due to Durham Tech and needing to attend a dedication at Durham Tech Community College for all the commissioners. And that was a wonderful event for all of us. So today is our work session, September 9th, and I will read the public charge. The Board of Commissioners asks its members and citizens to conduct themselves in a respectful, courteous manner, both with the board and fellow citizens. At any time, should any member of the board or any citizen fail to observe this public charge, the chair will ask the offending person to leave the meeting until that individual gains personal control. Should decorum fail to be restored, the chair will recess the meeting until such time that a genuine commitment to the public charge is observed. So the first thing on our agenda this morning is citizens' comments. During this part of the meeting, if there are any written comments, any email comments, since we are virtual, I will ask the clerk to read those for us.
Yes, Chair Howerton, we did receive one comment, and before I read it, we did have Commissioner Carter to join. I just want to make sure she's able to hear and we can hear her as well.
I hear you all. Yes.
Perfect. All right, thank you. The comments that we received, it came from Larissa Seibel. She did send a more detailed comment, which I will read that one instead of the one that was shared with the board yesterday. It reads, eviction emergency. County Commissioners, Durham has an eviction emergency now, and we will have a crisis of homelessness in the midst of the COVID pandemic. To save lives, we need to keep people in their homes. Last week, people were evicted every day. On Friday, there were 82 eviction hearings. People who were evicted last week could be put out on the streets this week. On Tuesday, people who had applications pending for emergency rental assistance were only given 4 days to get the rent paid before the next hearing this Friday. Tenants need rent funds before the eviction hearing, but Durham tenants cannot apply on their own. Durham requires the landlord to approve the application. Tenants should not be shackled to a landlord, who refuses to approve their application. Tenants should be free to pay the rent, to stay in their homes, or use the rent for a new home. The feds told local governments to give rent funds directly to tenants, and they allow us to use nonprofits to deliver advance assistance to households at risk of eviction while their applications are still being processed. Legal Aid is a nonprofit that can help. Let's use our partners and all the tools the feds give us to avert an eviction crisis. And she also included a link, www.whitehouse.gov, which has additional information regarding taking steps to prevent evictions as the delivery of the emergency rental assistance continues to increase. That concludes the citizen comments that were received.
Thank you, Monica, for reading that. And if Larissa is listening, we really appreciate her sending that to us. And it's something that we are all concerned about, is that our citizens are not evicted. Okay, and I'm sure that the staff that works on that is paying attention. So I'm going to move on to our consent agenda. And we have 14 consent items, commissioners, and I would like to ask our interim manager if she will begin to go through these items, and if commissioners have any questions or concerns, be able to discuss those. Okay.
Good morning, commissioners.
I will start with our first item. It's item number 250522, request to extend the building bridges between jails and community-based treatment for opioid use disorder demonstration project grant. And this is a budget amendment of $17,000. Item number 210524, budget ordinance amendment 22 BC 17 to recognize $14,000 in grant revenue from the Burt Bees Foundation to support an updated biological inventory for the New Hope Creek corridor. Next, we have item number 210526. This is to approve the final budget for phase 2 of the Mcfarland Farm Conservation Easement and approve capital budget amendment 22 number 6, decreasing the open space and farmland preservation capital project by $72,160 and a budget amendment that will increase by the same amount in pay-as-you-go funds.
Monica?
I just wanted to announce that Vice Chair Jacobs has joined the call, and I just want to make sure that she's able to hear me and that we can hear her. All right, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next, we have budget amendment 21, I'm sorry, we have agenda action form 210530, emergency and scheduled repairs for the wastewater treatment plant. Is a contract amendment for Carolina Civil Works, Inc.
Commissioner Jacobs?
Thank you. I just have a very general question about all of the items related to the Triangle Water Treatment Plant and the maintenance and the repairs. There are 6 different items on our consent agenda that are related to the water utilities and the pump stations. And I'm just wondering, and they're over $400,000 to increase various contracts. Just wondering, will the fees be changed to address, I guess, what looks like increasing maintenance as we have so much new construction in the Triangle, RTP area?
That's a great question. Jay, I'll let you get started. We typically look at our fee structure during the budget development process, but I know for the wastewater treatment plant, they're always looking at, well, are we breaking even with cost? Where are patterns? Where do we need to shift in staffing levels, et cetera? So I'll let Jay weigh in.
Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for that question, Vice Chair Jacobs. It's a great question, and it's one that we constantly examine to make sure, as you know, we have to run the utility like a private business without any tax revenue. And so we examine multiple times throughout the year our revenue streams and also our reserves to make sure we're in good shape. And I'd commend the board that each of the past few years, you've given very de minimis increases, which is essential to keeping us current and making sure we do have good reserves. And so we're in very good shape for this. We are examining as well because we realize our system's aging. And as you noted, we also have a lot of development pressure. And so, sorry, my screen's jiggling. I've got a 11-month-old kitten who wants to join me this morning for the work session. But we are also examining our capital needs as well and plan to bring forward some capital projects. But in the current, we feel we are on very sound fiscal ground to cover these contracts and these increases to the matter at hand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next we have 210533, Utilities Contract Amendment with David Young Utilities, Inc. for collection system emergency and scheduled repairs. The next one is 210534, Utilities Contract Amendment with Access Utility for Collection Systems Emergency and Scheduled Repairs. The next item is 210536, Contract Amendment and Budget Amendment establishing and adding funds for the fiscal year 21-22 Durham Pre-K contract with Child Care Services Association. The next item is 210537 to approve the 21-22 contract with the Greater Durham Black Chamber of Commerce for services related to small business support.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes, thank you so much, Claudia. I usually don't stop doing work session. I have seen the scope of services. The only thing I'm wondering is, I know you all are working with them. Will we get something more than a scope of services? I know with the work that we do with DDI, the work that we do with the Institute, the work that we do with the Chamber, we often have a timeline as well as a scope of work. We, on top of that, we have measurable deliverables, we have impact. I know this is new. This is the first time that this has happened. And $50,000 in no way is an investment into the Black business community in Durham, especially as large as it is. My concern is with this minimal amount of money and the partnerships that they have, I'm wondering, when are we going to get additional information about what that, because I've said this before, the proposal that was turned in didn't give us that. Certain people voted on it anyway. We got pushback from the community. So for me, I recognize that there are certain people in this community that are held to a higher standard. And since we've made this investment, I want to make sure that they're successful. And so we can only measure their success if we know what they're actually doing. So will we actually get something outside of a scope of services and a scope of work from them?
Yes, Commissioner Burns, it's a good question. And the answer is yes. Andy and Jay can also weigh in. This contract and scope of work is a starting point. Mm-hmm. We will continue to flesh this out as we also partner with the city on projects related to the ARPA funds and how we support businesses overall. And again, as you know, with that is also getting fleshed out. So there are lots of moving parts right now. We had some detailed conversations about what those next steps will be. By January timeframe, we can give you more detailed information, if not before. And Andy, yeah.
We're good, and I don't want to hold up Jay or Andy, not to cut them off, because this is good. That was my only question. I mean, people pretended to be invested in this project, and they haven't reached out to these individuals at all. You all have, and I just wanted to make sure that was clear. But thank you, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
And thank you, Commissioner Burns. It's what I hear from you, and I too, is how do we set them up to win?
Mm-hmm. Right.
A lot of times we set people up to fail, and it's how do we set them up to win? Right.
I didn't hear anybody ever say what they liked about that original proposal, ever. Yeah. In any meeting, no matter when we asked, ever. And they pushed and pushed and pushed. And Claude, I know you did the hard work, Claude. Excuse me, Interim Manager Hager. Let me put some respect on your name. You have done a lion's share of work for a faux attempt at trying to appease a people that this won't appease, but I do appreciate your efforts.
Well, and I will say, they did submit a proposal, and I will have to say Andy and Jay and myself, we sort of looked at, well, what do we need at this juncture?
Right.
And how can they help us with some of the gaps that are there? And as you pointed out, this is not a large amount of money. However, we need to make sure that we have results with the expense. So we will come back to you with additional information. This is different than what they originally proposed.
Right.
But I think it heads us in a direction that can be a win-win.
And this looks better. Respectfully to you, Jay and Andy, not to prolong this looks better. And this is not me asking for money for them.
Sure.
This scope like that you have set up is 10 times better than what we've seen in the past. So I do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next one is 210539, Utilities Contract Amendment with Carolina Civil Works, Inc. for emergency and scheduled repairs. Number 210540, application for funding for Chin Road Pump Station for Utilities Division.
Commissioner Jacobs?
Yes, thank you. I hope we get this grant. Just looking at the $20 million price tag. I don't remember, is this in our CIP, this pump station? I didn't remember.
Jay.
Good morning again, commissioners. Commissioner Jacobs, thank you for the question. Again, back to the finances, as y'all are aware, the utility runs on its own funds. And so we sometimes have a utility CIP in as an addenda in the broader county CIP, which is primarily funded by, and I'll answer that question from the dog in a moment, if y'all don't mind. We sometimes segregate it due to the funding differences and it being on its own unique set of funds. What we have found, Commissioner, is we had upgraded the Stirrup iron pump station. And I know some of you who've been on the board a few years may remember that project from a few years back. Yeah. We anticipated getting probably 10 to 15 years life out of that before needing anything. However, with the pace of development, we're finding we are burning capacity in that much faster than had been projected, than anyone could have forecast. And so this project is needed to help us effectively basin split and divert some of the flow to another place to prolong the life of stirrup iron and also not end up in a place where we can't take advantage of folks wanting to come to the Triangle for both jobs and for general fund tax base to help fund other needs. And so it is one that has jumped up fairly quick, and we have done the studies with our consultants to make sure we understand what the need is. And so the short answer is it's been mentioned probably in passing in some narrative, but it has not been a definitive project, but it is definitely a definitive project now. And we are hopeful that, as I tell I've got 2 in college now, and as I tell them, OPM's the best way to go to college. It's also the best way to build a lift station, other people's money. So we're asking today for your support for this funding application to help us with that. And it does not obligate the county to anything. The action before you would simply authorize the chair to sign an application and the manager for us to submit and see if we could secure some funding.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, I know we've, the Snow Hill pump station that has been in our CIP.
Yes, ma'am.
So I was surprised to see this, but we've all of the projects that we've been approving, the economic and development incentives we've been involved with. I think the flip side is that we're seeing what the development that goes along with it. I just want to make sure that we are tying those costs to the developers and not just to the public at large. So I guess going back to the my other question about the fees associated with hooking up to our utilities, but okay, keeping my fingers crossed on the grant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, I just quickly want to say that I'm going to start a little notebook of Jay Gibsonisms. He has the best sayings, and I am going to start writing them down.
He does. What is it? It's one that I love about the cost. I can't remember the exact words, but he does.
OPM, other people's money.
No, that's not the one that I'm thinking of, but he's got
Jay,
some.
charge a fee for your services, Jay. Charge a fee.
Yeah, and don't let
I think I'm hearing another
Can't let people
potential.
steal you. Can't let people steal your stuff.
I hear another funding stream for my kids' college tuition forthcoming, I believe.
Okay, we'll turn it back to Claudia.
Okay, great. We have 210542 utilities contract amendment with National Power. The next one is 210543 approval of the contract with Hagerty Consulting for complex coordinated training. Next, we have an item 210547. This is an Alliance Services carryover funds from 21 into 21-22. This is one that we talked about during the budget period, and we have a budget. We are basically sharing how we recommend going forward, and we'll come back to the board in February with the remaining approach.
Okay.
210550, an amendment of $318,750 for the Governor's Highway Safety Program grant.
Commissioner Jacobs, you have a question?
Yeah, I actually have my hand up for the last one related to the Alliance funding. I'm so excited to see this additional $650,000. I mean, this is no chump change. So the fact that we have almost $1.7 million additional funding for mental health investments is fantastic. And I really appreciate the recommendations for how at least the first part to be used. I was wondering if we could please get a report back to our board about how many residents are served. I was really interested in this MOORS program, which is supposed to be mobile response specifically for children that gives follow-up care for 45 days. If we could, at some point get some report about how many residents have actually been served by this additional funding would be great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So, and I know, Claudia, we've talked about our mental health area and wondering, are we going to put together a team of people to really dive into that conversation as to what's missing, what we need and what's missing?
Yes, yeah, Commissioner Howerton, yes, we have a structure in place in how we are going to look at the budget as well as components that are related. And then I may have to ask Jody to give the update that I guess it's with one of the grants or one of the programs initiatives that is through their Criminal Justice Resource Center. And so there's a contract that the board recommended that we move forward with approximately $25,000 that we're partnering with the UNC school. Mm-hmm. And Jody, can you give us more details? Because this is one that is not as fresh on my memory, but I know there's lots of activity and steps underway.
Certainly. So good morning, commissioners. If you recall, during the budget work sessions, our CJRC Director, Gudrun Palmer, presented to you regarding updating our interceptor mapping work that the Stepping Up Initiative had been working on that really looks at behavioral health infrastructure, not only in the county, but sort of the larger Durham area, especially as it relates to criminal justice services and law enforcement services. And so part of your budget funded an update for that study. And so we have been working with UNC on a proposal to update that study. The target of having that information available is going to be early 2022. And so we'll be working over the next few months with all of our stakeholders who were part of the initial study, but also reaching out to those who need to be incorporated in that work, not only looking at updating what we've done in the past, but also looking at adding additional information about capacity. What are the capacity needs and opportunities within Durham? And this will be in coordination with a lot of the work that the city's doing, in particular with their community safety department. So we've got that work that's underway. In addition to that work, we've also been working with the budget team and our management fellow on doing some benchmarking work around what other counties, their level of investment regarding behavioral health resources as well. And so we'll be able to have all that information going into early 2022 as we start understanding and planning for next year's budget, but also see if there's other opportunities for some level of investment in the current fiscal year.
Jody, I hope we are really going to do the touchstones with the community folks that really need to serve us. I mean, we have, rather than just the organizations that are really working with the most, our most needed communities.
Certainly understand. And a lot of those organizations and agencies are those who've been part of the Stepping Up initiative, and he'll be part of this sequential interceptor mapping work update. And so it's going to be a collaborative effort, not only on the work that we're doing, but also the work that the city's doing under their community safety department as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Okay.
Madam
Commissioner
Chair.
Long.
I think Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Long was
Commissioner
first.
Long.
Yeah, she was first.
Thank you. Yeah,
Hang on just 1 second. Monica, is there any way that I can be able to see all the commissioners without having to move my screen back and forth?
You could hit your view button at the top. Do you see that?
I have, but I'm only seeing.
Are you doing gallery view? Yeah, if you hit it, and it'll do a drop down that says speaker and then gallery.
I see.
It should be up at the top.
All right, now I see everybody. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Burns.
I was just saying, thank you, Commissioner Burns. I was only seeing 3 commissioners, not everybody. So, all right, great.
Thank you. My comment is very quick, just related to 21-0550. I know, because we were switching back and forth. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Manager Hager, GM Miller, Sheriff Burkhead, because I know we had a lot of questions and back and forth around this item in the past meetings. And I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate on the award supplement document on page 2, adding of this wording that clarifies a lot of the questions that we had regarding, and if I may read it, like once these funds have been exhausted after year 4, Durham County Sheriff's Office will reapply under the same terms and conditions. And if there are no other grant funding opportunities available at the time, Durham County Sheriff's Office will thoroughly review the data and determine the efficacy and sustainability of the program. So I just really want to appreciate the staff taking our questions and concerns into consideration and adding that into the documentation.
You said we're going back and forth. You went forward, Commissioner Long. You're not there yet, but no. I
thought we were on that one.
No, I'm speaking, but you was like, we going back and forth. And I was like, mine was really quick. It was along the lines of something Commissioner Jacob said. I also was encouraged to see that we had some funding for the Morris program. However, I know that there's
Commissioner Burns, your volume is getting all messed up.
No, well, it's actually $1 million. Okay, I'm gonna come out and come back in. I apologize. Now to do your 550 again.
Okay. All right.
I could have sworn Manager Hager had read that item. My bad.
No, I had read that one, and then there are parts of these two that are similar, because part of Commissioner Harrington's comment about next steps with the review of dollars that support mental health In the item that's related to the highway safety grant, at the very bottom paragraph, at page 13, it talks about the sequential intercept model and what we'll be doing in upcoming months. So it's good we had that little break so I could be reminded that was there. So that covers what Jody shared as well. So
Great.
This
okay, Commissioner Burns, you're back?
Yes, ma'am. This is very quick. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the carryover was not just the 600,000. Commissioner Jacobs is right. It's no chump change. It's $1.6 million. And I know that in the details, it says that we'll come back mid-year and look at it. There's some funding in that out of that $650,000, not just for the Moores funding. They also say, we might have to do some renovations to the building. I would be interested to see, much like Commissioner Jacobs, to see how many individuals we impacted with that 45 days. Like, let's just say we have to do some renovations and we only spend like $300,000 on that program. If we find out that it's really impactful, I just want to put in everybody's mind, since we have an additional $1 million, I would love to see, well, if this really works, can we put that $1 million into Moores? So that's just a thought I want us to think about, because it's actually 1.6. But if that program really works, and I think that would also show the community it's an additional effort that we're making as a board in mental health. So just want to throw that out there early, 6 months early.
Great. And I want to thank the budget team, Keith, David, and Shannon, for fleshing out that item. Some of our interlocal agreements are quite unique and different, and the way we treat the Alliance is unique. It is focused to get the biggest bang of the dollars, but longer term, so that they retain those dollars when they're not used at the end. And so, although about 1 million was carried forward from this year, there was a prior balance of 600,000 that was there that can only be used for Durham, and they basically have to request it. So I appreciate them also sort of fleshing out those nuances. Okay, we can go to the next one if the board is ready. Item 210554, approve the interlocal agreement and joint use agreement for the new Station 18 co-located public safety facility located at Herndon Road, Durham, North Carolina. Approve the capital project amendment number 22007 to appropriate the county contribution of $2.4 million and to create that project. And this was one that we added, and Jody can share any details about this item that the board may have. This is very similar to an ILA that we had with the city for the other joint public safety facility. And I'll let Jody take over.
Yes, thank you, Manager Hager. Good morning, board again. I'm sorry that we had a technical glitch and this did not get added to your consent agenda until earlier today. But this interlocal agreement and project amendment follows our strategy for co-locating our EMS stations and fire stations with the city where possible. So this interlocal agreement follows the same model for Station 17, which is our first co-located model. It's included in the current CIP. We also have a third co-located project scheduled for 2023 for Station 19. So from a standpoint of an interlocal agreement, the framework is the same. It's based on square footage. Usage for the county's contribution on the EMS side. We have a little bit of a different prototype that we've used for Station 18 model. We've added an additional double ambulance bay for the Station 18. It makes sense to do it in that location. And we may look at doing the same in the Station 19 prototype. You'll see the information's provided to you within their agenda items. Certainly, if there's more specific questions you have between now and Monday, certainly happy to answer them. We have Emergency Services Director Groves with us, as well as Chief Paramedic Mark Lockhart, if there are service questions you have on your mind today regarding this issue. Moving forward, we'd like to go ahead and get this approved by the board at our meeting on the 13th. The city will move forward with their side of the agreement at their meeting in early October. As soon as we can get the agreement approved, it allows us to move to the construction phase, which is really important to help us manage and contain costs. So I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Jody, it's since the board hasn't had an opportunity to read through all of the attachments, because we just got it today, it might serve the board to be able to have time to read through it over the next couple of days and then send you any questions that they may have to be ready to approve it on Monday, if that's okay with the board.
Certainly. That would work for us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jacobs, you have a question?
I just had a comment. I just wanted to thank Jody for your work on this, and that this is just a great model. I'm really glad to see us moving forward with partnering with the city, and the co-location is just a great, effective, efficient use of our resources. So thank you, Jody.
Well, and I have a team of people who work on this with me, with Director Groves and Chief Lockhart, but also Assistant General Manager Perry Manns and our project manager Jim Ferris all work on our behalf on this important project. Also on the budget side, David Adey and Keith Lang are important in helping us with the budget side of it, as well as Susan Tezai on the finance side. So it's a team approach, and it's an efficient and smart approach to help make sure we provide those critical, mission critical public safety infrastructure projects for the community.
So Jody, the team makes the dream work.
It does, and we've got a great team here.
Yeah, none of us get anything done without the team. It's no I in we. So thank you, and thank you. I see Jem, you're there for any questions, and I think we want to have an opportunity to read through the information, and if we have any questions, we'll get back with you between now and Monday. Does that work?
Sounds good. Commissioners, thank you for your flexibility. We'll look and certainly send us your questions as you review the materials.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, anything else, Claudia?
No, ma'am, that concludes the consent agenda items.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we are down to our discussion items. And the first 121-0561 is approval of the zoning map change, Old Bahama Fire Station, Z20000046. The board is requested to close the public hearing, which was considered at the August 23rd regular session, suspend the rules and entertain two motions. So at this time, I will ask the clerk if there are any comments received.
Chair Howerton, there were no comments received regarding this public hearing item.
Thank you, Monica. Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and bring the item back to the board. Are there any additional comments from commissioners? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to suspend the rules.
So moved, Madam Chair.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lum. Need a second. By Commissioner Carter. Okay, we have a motion to suspend the rules, and the clerk will call for a verbal vote.
Commissioner Alam.
Aye.
Commissioner Burns.
Aye.
Commissioner Carter.
Aye.
Vice Chair Jacobs.
Aye.
And Chair Howerton.
Aye, we have moved to suspend the rules, been approved. And now, commissioners, we have two motions up for approval. I get a motion for the first and the second motion. So what's the first one first?
Okay, Commissioner, Chair Howerton, I will try. Let's see. I move that we adopt an ordinance amending the Unified Development Ordinance by taking property out of commercial neighborhoods, CN, and residential suburban 20RX-20 MLR-A watershed overlay zoning districts and establishing the same as the commercial neighborhood with a text-only development plan, CNDM/LR-A watershed overlay. And I further move that we adopt the appropriate statement of consistency pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 160D/605. Was I wrong?
I think we need to vote on them separately.
Separately?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah,
I will
that's the
second.
first and
I
the
will
second.
second the first motion.
Jacobs is second.
I think we should have
Okay.
Commissioner Burns repeat all that just for fun.
Let me get some
That's
water.
perfectly not okay. So it's been moved and properly second, the first motion, and we need a verbal vote from the clerk.
Commissioner Alam,
Aye.
Commissioner Burns,
Aye.
Commissioner Carter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Jacobs,
Aye.
Chair Howerton.
Aye. The first motion has been approved 5-0. Now we will move to the second motion.
I second the second motion made by Commissioner Burns.
Okay. And we need a second.
That was she seconded.
You have to make the motion and then
I'll do it again. Okay. Oh,
didn't-
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the appropriate statement of consistency pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 160D/605.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly second to accept the second motion. Verbal vote called by the clerk.
Commissioner Alam,
Aye.
Commissioner Burns,
Aye.
Commissioner Carter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Jacobs,
Aye.
Chair Howerton.
Aye. It is approved 5-0. Now we will move on to our next item, which is 210521, Community Cat Management Presentation. The board is asked to review and receive information and research on community cat management strategies provided by the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. I'd like to introduce Jane Paul with AWAC to introduce all attendees to begin this presentation. There you are. Hi, Jane.
Hi, can you
Welcome.
hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Okay. Hi, good morning, and Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and honorable commissioners. My name's Jan Paul. I am a member of the Durham Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. I was appointed essentially as an at-large member by Sheriff Burkhead in 2018 at the recommendation of Captain Tim Deck, who is now retired, but who was in the Durham County Sheriff's Office and in charge of what used to be called animal controls, now called animal services or animal welfare services. Captain Mark Manning is on the line. We have prepared a PowerPoint, which I appreciate the ability that to screen share. And I want to quickly go through the PowerPoint. I do want to make the point that I am not a subject matter expert on community cat management or feral cat management, if you, as you may better know it, but I am the spokesperson for the group, and we do have on this call a number of subject matter experts because I suspect that you may have some questions at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, and I want to make sure that you have got access to the people who know the answers and aren't just making them up like I might have to do. So I want to, again, thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. And beginning with the Durham County Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. It's the community cat management presentation. Want to start out just by pointing out that primary stakeholders in this matter are community members, wildlife conservationists, Durham County Animal Services, APS of Durham, Durham County Public Health. I don't know if Director Jenkins is on the call, but he did attend several of our research and discussion special meetings on this topic and provided some input for public health on that, which I'll discuss later in the PowerPoint. And then there are a number of animal rescue and animal welfare organizations, as well as just individual community members who are concerned about this. This is not a new issue for Durham. This is an issue that has gone on for quite some time, but I want to start out the way that we're going to end this discussion, which are the 4 goals that the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee has set out for the future of Durham County. Also just want to let you know that the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee is a committee that was established by the Board of County Commissioners to provide recommendations about animal welfare and animal control matters. And this is a subject that has been discussed in Durham for quite some time. Our 4 goals are decreasing the euthanasia rate for feral or community cats, decreasing the feral cat population, because trapping and euthanizing are not working. And we have looked into and delved at great length into quite a number of academic studies and treatises, as well as had any number of presentations over the past year and a half on this current committee to talk about the efficacy of trapping and euthanizing in terms of public health safety, as well as decreasing a feral cat and nuisance population. Minimization of public health risks is, of course, a very critical and clear goal. And then there needs to be some focus on resources to assist the Durham Animal Protection Society, as well as the Sheriff's Office Animal Services Division, in providing services and education to the public. And without going into a lot of detail of the history, I think it is important to know, and a number of you have been on the board for a number of years, as well as have been citizens of Durham for a number of years, and may know of a lot of the discussion on this, but there have been not only a lot of discussion and I would say to some extent controversy in the community about the approach to managing the feral cat population in Durham. But there have also been some official committees and subcommittees that have studied it. So as you can see, this first feral cat subcommittee of the Animal Welfare Advisory Board, or Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, was established in 2010. There was a second one that went from 2012 to 2013. There was one in 2015 that was inactivated. And then when I started on the board, or on the committee, at the end of December of 2018, this was a hot topic at that time. The next slide will show essentially that there just is an estimate. Of course, there's no way to know the number. Approximately 30,000 feral cats in Durham. The number is increasing, and according to the experts who are keeping track as best they can, the more residents we have coming into Durham, and as we all know, Durham is a very quickly popular and growing community. The more folks that come into this community, the more cats are brought into this community as well. And so different approaches have been discussed for having to managing the population. Trapping and euthanizing is what is currently occurring. And again, data and statistics and very extensive studies that has been accumulated in various places over the past 15 to 20 years are showing that's not effective in controlling the population. Remove, relocate, and sanctuary are options. And then TNVR, which stands for trap, neuter, vaccinate, and release. And I'll say at the beginning of this that even for those of us who started out on this, had no knowledge of the extent of the problem or manners or methods in which to address the problem, had no opinion whatsoever. After a year and a half of really quite extensive study, we have determined that TNVR is the most effective way and is something that we would ask the commission to explore. And I'll get on in a bit to the manners. We've had a wildlife expert talk to us. We've had folks come talk to us and give us presentations about effects on birds, which a lot of community members are concerned about. No endangered species are affected by cats in Durham. With regard to birds, there is a PowerPoint by Scott Anderson, who is an expert in this subject with the state, and he suggested public education to keep cats indoors as much as possible, and also relocation of problem feral cats. There are certain communities in which there have been a lot of complaints, apartment complexes, as well as subdivisions, including one out here in the northern part of the county in Trayburn, where there are feral cat colonies that need to be managed that are providing nuisances in Durham. And there are a number of legal concerns, and I know that the board is that's high on your radar. We do have the county attorney's office that has been engaged in looking at our county ordinances and reviewing them for the duration of all of these studies over the past 10, 15 years. And there are NC, North Carolina state laws regarding rabies and animal controls. And of course, according to the North Carolina general statutes and chapters, I believe 153A and 160A, there is a large amount of discretion that is given to each county and municipality in order to regulate the public health and the public welfare, which includes controlling animals, and not only what is in the best interest of animals, but what is in the best interest of the health of the public. And then there has been quite a bit of research done for liability issues. With regard to the second subcommittee, trapping and euthanasia is only a small part of the cat population. And again, its conclusions were that the only effective way to reduce the population of community free roaming feral cats and to make sure that good disease containment practices are put into place is to implement a TNVR program. And the committee did vote to do that and identified these 5 key areas, which you can see that would be to define in our ordinances what are owned cats versus community cats, to make sure that we are consistent and compliant with state rabies law and local licensing, dealing with the requirement of the permit to allow trapping, which not only places a large burden on our animal services officers, but in some ways is difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. And then with regard to the definition of abandonment, to determine who are caretakers and to try to return cats that have been sterilized and vaccinated. And then there is an issue about the requirement for stray and abandoned animals to be turned over to APS and not to allow feeding of those. And we do have folks not only from animal welfare services, but also from the Durham shelter who can speak to the effects and the burdens and the concerns that they have, not only from a personal and human standpoint of the euthanization numbers of cats and the human toll that takes on having to engage in that, but also the financial resources and the fiscal concerns, because it, as our research has shown, it is fiscally more responsible for TNVR and actually can result in cost savings to counties and municipalities when, as opposed to trapping and euthanizing and putting the burden on animal services, manpower and resources, as well as APS resources. So again, the next slide on the AWAC history, feral cat discussion, this talks about the TNVR impact on wildlife and songbirds, the public health concerns, and the barriers that are in the Durham ordinances currently. With regard to feral cat programs, I think it's important to note that 64 counties out of 100 in Durham have animal services organizations that support TNVR programs, trap, neuter, vaccinate, and release program. And that's outlined, they're listed on that particular slide. And then on the following slide, there is a comprehensive list of all of the counties in Durham that endorse and support TNVR programs. In the course of our study of this, and again, it was quite an intensive academic study, we had educational presentations from Jess Arias of Burlington. She's on the line. We've had, you can see who the folks are that we had present to us. And we tried to make sure that we got a cross section, that we tried to explore and review all points of view. Those who are supportive of TNVR, those who are against TNVR, those who just frankly that don't like cats and don't want cats around. Public health is, of course, a huge concern, and conservation biologists for wildlife, birds. We had the state veterinarian come on, as well as I indicated, Rodney Jenkins was kind enough to join us in some of our meetings. Want to just point out, and I won't have to read you the whole slide, but Jess Arias, who is on the line, has run a very effective and successful program in Burlington, Alamance County, called the Mighty Mousers Community Cat Program. And again, the purpose is one of our goals, or a number of our goals here in Durham, to stabilize and reduce free roaming cat population, make sure that cats are not taken to the shelter, and that human and financial burden placed on the shelter and animal services, unless it's unavoidable, and then trying to rehome or place or repurpose, if you will, feral cats or community cats. And the statistics here on this chart, and again, Ms. Arias is available and she is on this call, but she provided a chart that shows what the changes have been, how this has affected their community, and how it has not only improved the general attitude in Alamance County, but has also helped to control the feral cat population. They've done it through community partnerships, so the entire burden of financial burden is not placed on the county. There are community partnerships with organizations and individuals who are in support of these programs and know how to implement and manage them. There are fewer nuisance complaints there because there is vaccination of these animals, and it's more widespread. Then it reduces the rabies threat. They have community education efforts. They've implemented a barn cat adoption program, and I'll tell you, I've got a very nice, lovable barn cat here that has got the ear tip that was a feral cat at some point, who is also very friendly and nice and doesn't bite people. And I'm responsible for her vaccines. And then there's increased support from the community. The next slide shows Dr. Josh Fisher, who's director of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Animal Care and Control. He is also president of the National Animal Care and Control Association. And again, he talks specifically about unnecessary euthanasia, the benefits of a community cat program, and talked about barriers that are in local ordinances, such as the ones we currently have in our Durham ordinances, including issues regarding definitions, harboring ownership, who's responsible and liability issues as well. We had Paula Gillikin come and talk to us about another very important program that they have in Beaufort, and that shows, the next slide shows the impact in that county of the Beaufort Community CAT project and the impact over a 5-year period. They've succeeded with volunteer trappers, limited caretaker participation, consistent follow-up, adoption of young kittens. Lincoln County's animal control on the next slide. Animal control director talked about how the euthanasia rate went down with implementation of a TNVR program in collaboration with the shelter, and they applied for and received grant monies to purchase a van and also to pay the salary of a TNVR coordinator. Independent Animal Rescue is another group that's highly invested in this community in the care of community cats, feral cats, free roaming cats, and methods of trying to reduce the number and the population, the ever increasing crisis in the explosion of feral cats in the community. And the next slide with the various blocks, various colors, talks about some of the things that they do. They schedule spay and neuter clinics on Sunday mornings, add extra clinics when there's a need. They loan humane traps, and ultimately that you can look at the statistics, how many out of 2019, 1,500 cats came to the clinic and 400 didn't have to return to the outdoors. And that's a significant percentage. And again, the goal was to eliminate unnecessary euthanasia. I think it's important to note on the next slide that we have on the line or on the call John Graves from Best Friends Animal Society. And Best Friends Animal Society is a national nonprofit organization that works on researching and helping other localities, municipalities, and areas, and making plans, doing ordinance review. And we had Kelsey Gilmore Feuderall, who was their legislative counsel, and they were generous enough to do a comprehensive review of Durham ordinances to compare them to ordinances not only in other counties in North Carolina, but in other states, and to make recommendations as to changes that could be made in the Durham ordinances in order to reach the goals that the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee has established. And again, the animal control take of free roaming cats includes education on the benefits and the resources for spay, neuter, and vaccination, responsible feeding and management practices for those who choose to care for community cats, and as well as addresses public health concerns. The next slide is the animal control statement of the National Animal Care and Control Association, which essentially just echoes the position statement that I just described, and talked about and did extensive studies on at the end, as you see, use of time and public funds, and that without a TNVR program, it not only is fiscally not effective, but it is not effective in controlling the explosion of feral cat population, as well as deterring or trying to eliminate or prohibit, prevent the spread of rabies and other diseases that could be carried by cats. And I think it is important to note that the American Bar Association, we're talking here about changes to the Durham ordinance, looking at state law, what the county is able to do in terms of its own ordinances. And the American Bar Association took up this subject quite some time ago and approved a resolution 102B, and that calls for legislation and policies at state and local levels to implement trap, neuter, vaccinate, and return programs for free roaming cats. And it's also important to note, I think, that that measure was proposed by the American Bar Association's Tort Trial and Insurance Practice section, which studied the financial cost benefits to TNVR programs in communities, as well as liability issues. And the report estimated that there were something like 40 million at that time free roaming or community cats in the United States, and that for decades, jurisdictions trapped and removed community cats in programs that typically resulted in the cats being killed. But TNVR program places socialized cats and kittens for adoption when possible, or cats returned to the community are fed and monitored by volunteers. So it's important to note that sometimes, because those who care for community cats might be found in violation of criminal or civil laws requiring licensing or limiting cat ownership, which is what I was talking about earlier about discussion and definitions of ownership, that laws defining owner should exempt community cat caregivers, at-large laws, stray hold periods, and licensing requirements. And that was a recommendation of the American Bar Association. And that particular, if you look that up and do some research on that particular resolution, there was a lot of discussion about third-party liability for caregivers if they're deemed to be owners of community cats, and ways that ordinances could be phrased to try to eliminate the risk, not only to communities, but to individuals. And that was done back 5 years ago in 2017. The next slide just talks about the vacuum effect, the difference between catch and kill and trap, neuter, or neuter or spay and return, which is not only an effective and cost-efficient approach, but is a humane approach. Whereas the catch and kill essentially results in proliferation and expansion of the cat society. The next slide, the Durham scorecard, and this is the best information that we could get. 574 cats were euthanized, and we've got here the save rate, the killed rate, the number of no-killed shelters, and it talks about what happened in Durham between 2017 and 2019. That's just a little bit of history. We had a present, and we do have APS representatives on this call as well, who can talk about shelter numbers and the effect on shelter staff and volunteers of having to euthanize a large number of cats that are trapped and then ultimately brought into the shelter to be killed. The next slide is just the head of a PowerPoint that was presented to us by the bird conservation biologists of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. The slide afterwards shows what are the direct causes of mortality to birds. And of course, cats are a large predator for birds, but so are windows and automobiles. And they've done a study showing that there are no bird species. One of his conclusions in his presentation to us, there are no bird species in Durham or in North Carolina that are threatened or that threatened to extinction because of cats or otherwise. And so what is important is that there be public stakeholder buy-in and adequate resources for TNVR, that you combine multiple control techniques and have a consistent removal effort of colonies that could be threats to large areas of birds. The next slide is from that we had.
Jane, excuse me a second, please. You're going to run out of time. Are there particular items? And I hate to.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm having to manage this time, and you only have about 5 minutes, and that's for commissioners to ask you questions and so
Oh,
on.
okay.
So
Well,
is there some way that you can
Yep.
wrap it up so that they can have a minute to ask questions?
Yes, ma'am. I think these are the most important slides next. If you look at the public health recommendations that the CDC and the State Division of Public Health have no official position statement on feral cats. A publication in the state had recommendation for TNVR, and just to realize how important it is for there to be vaccinations. So the following slides, you'll just scroll through them. The shelter goals are listed in there. We've already discussed that. Decreasing the population, less euthanasia. We've got our findings, the feral cat concerns that the feral cat population isn't decreasing with what we're doing now. There are barriers to it with language in the current ordinances. Research has been presented showing the success of TNVR. Our public health director has expressed support for TNVR, as well as a critical support for rabies vaccinations, and that wildlife doesn't have a official position. The ordinance barriers are in the challenges ahead slide, and the final one is moving forward. And so again, we would just ask that you authorize the county attorney's office who has already done some research on this, to make sure that they can develop a proposed ordinance for presentation to the Board of County Commissioners that would allow and authorize a TNVR program. The how is something that would need to be addressed after there was ordinance change that would allow TNVR in Durham, because currently the way the ordinances are drafted, it's not even permitted under the law. And if there are questions, if you would just ask, and I think that experts on the field can just jump in if it's directed at your area of expertise.
Thank you, Jane. And I apologize for having to rush you toward the end, but we are rushing for time. We had to cut our meeting short this morning because of a presentation at Durham Tech, and we just want to make sure that commissioners have a couple of minutes. We've got 2 or 3 minutes, commissioners, to ask questions. So if you have some direct questions that you can ask, please do that. But know that in 3 minutes, I'm going to end this conversation so we can move on to the next one. And you may have the attorney ask questions from the attorney later to get what you need, because I don't know if we can manage all of this morning. It doesn't sound like. Commissioner Jacobs, you have a question?
Yeah, I to move this item along, I just want to say that I strongly support the request and the recommendation from this committee. I was on the Animal Services Board my first term, and the same issue came up. And it's clear to me from all the research and the work that's been done, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's worked on this. You've done your homework and your due diligence. So I would like to just make a recommendation. Well, I would question. Well, I think that we have a request before us to ask direct the county attorney to look at revising our ordinance. That is the request that we've been given from this committee, and I support that request.
Mr. Jacobs, please let's not do this right now, because I'm trying to move this meeting forward. If you have a question, please do that. If not, let the other commissioners ask that question. We know what the request is, so let's move ahead, please. Commissioner Burns, do you have a question?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Mine is one, just a quick thank you. Thank you, Jane. I remember when Commissioner Carter brought this forward. I did not know that there were 30,000 feral cats. That 319 number is right around 1%. My question is, in the event that we put in TNVR, I imagine that we want to further reduce how many we euthanize, especially since it's at 1% and it has an emotional toll on the staff. In the event we push forward with the TNVR approach, do you imagine that we would still do euthanizations in conjunction with it, or would we completely do away with that? Because that 300 is like literally 1% of 30,000. So what is the thought process behind that?
So this is Shafanda, I'm the executive director of the APS. Hi. We would, I mean, it's going to take some time to get control over the population issues in Durham and correcting our ordinances issues. So euthanasia will continue to happen, but hopefully what we will see is a decrease in euthanasia, because it is hard for everyone involved.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just quickly, as the current commissioner assigned to the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, just want to really emphasize the depth of work and research that has gone into this recommendation request from the group, and thank Jan, excellent presentation, and everyone else on the call. I won't go through all the names, but a lot of people, Tim Dack, when he was still here, have been really involved in this. And I do encourage us to, soon, Madam Chair, ask our legal team to take on the challenge of looking at our ordinance.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Carter. And I'm sure our legal team is on the line, and our manager is on the line as well here. So the staff will take this on and get back to us. And I, it's no doubt we all support it. And now we'll just leave it to our manager and our attorneys to get back with us and let us know what we need to do and by when. Does that work for you?
Yes.
And thank all of you for doing the hard work, as my colleagues have said, to bring this to us, and this is a very important issue for all of us in all of our counties that you represent as well. So thank you. And again, I apologize for having to move so quickly, but that's what happens sometimes. We try to get so much done, and the time just doesn't allow for long, drawn out conversations. But if it's something else that you need us to know, feel free to send us an email or give us a call back. We're happy to hear from you. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
You are welcome. So we and as I said, we have heard the request, so it'll be it's to the manager and our attorneys, and they'll get back to us, commissioners. So our next item is 210538. And it's got two numbers here, and then it's 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This is a 45-minute item, commissioners, and the board is requested to receive a presentation from the Durham Chapel Hill Cardboro Metropolitan Planning Organization on development of the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Ellen Beckman, Durham County Transportation Manager, is on the line, and I will ask her to introduce the attendees and begin the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. Still morning, I think. As mentioned, Ellen Beckman, Durham County Transportation Manager. I'm introducing Andy Henry, who's Senior Transportation Planner for the Durham Chapel Hill Cardboro Metropolitan Planning Organization, or DCHC-MPO. The MPO is the regional long-range transportation planning organization for all of Durham County and part of Orange and Chatham County. It's federally mandated to develop these long-range transportation plans, and the MTP is the primary MPO planning document that really drives all of its prioritization processes and how we pursue federal and state funding for projects. It's updated about every 4 years. So with that, I will turn it over to Andy, who will go through this presentation, and there will be opportunity for questions and discussion.
Thank you. If you'd, again, my name's Andy Henry, work for the DCHC MPO. And if you go ahead and advance the slide. So I'll talk a little bit about the MPO, what the MTP is, a little bit about what our goals are, and a bit about the alternatives analysis, where we look at different alternatives to see what projects we want to put in our final plan, different scenarios. I'll talk about some metrics and maps, and then at the end, I'll tell you what the MPO's next steps are. Next slide. Very quickly, on the left, that's the context of our planning area. You see that red line there, that's encompasses about 9 or 10 counties. It's a travel demand model that we use. Inside of that, that purple line, that's the DCHC MPO. And if you look on the right, that's a close-up. So it includes all of Durham County, all the urbanized areas of Orange County, and a little bit of northeast Chatham County. And you can see we have a sister agency over there in Raleigh, Wake County, that purple line and that map on the left, that's the capital area MPO. So this is our planning area. Next slide. So these are concentric circles. They're different plans and how they feed into each other. The important thing about the MTP is we're trying to get projects funded, and that's that smallest circle there. That's the Transportation Improvement Program. And to get into that program, you got to get through that little hatched line, that circle there. That's the prioritization process where they score the projects, and if a project scores well, it gets funding identified for it in TIP. But to get into the prioritization process, you'll see the next concentric circle out. That's the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and that's the plan we're talking about today. So that's the importance of it. Get projects funded, and also some jurisdictions still use the plan for their development review. So very, very important plan. Next slide. These are just the milestones for developing the MTP. We're in the middle there, alternatives analysis. That's what I'm talking about today. But where we want to get to in the next month or so is the preferred option, and that's our draft plan. That's in October. We'll come back in December with hopefully approve a draft, and then we'll make sure that do air quality conformity, and that makes sure that the transportation sector emissions are underneath certain thresholds. So that's the plan there. Next slide. Well, before I start today, I just want to talk a little bit. We had a pretty extensive goals survey and public input. And I just want you to look, I put some of the highest ranked policies and some of the highest ranked themes that we had back then when we put together our goals and objectives. And you'll see support for biking and walking, transit service, land use and transportation coordination, carpooling, reduce our dependence on personal vehicles, protect the environment, support low-income and minority populations. And these themes come up again and again. We just did another survey recently for this alternatives analysis, and the same themes. There was a lot of support for increasing and improving bus service, for commuter rail, for bicycle and pedestrian projects, and for reducing emissions. Those were the big things that came up recently. They haven't changed. Next slide. So the alternatives analysis, we have different scenarios that we bring forward, and we analyze them, look at them, see how they're different. It's really to get the public and our board discussing the various projects in those different scenarios. And we really want to get to the preferred option, which is our draft plan. And one other thing I want to tell you before we go any further is if you have a copy of today's presentation, there's anything underlined is usually a link, okay, that will go to our website and give you more details in that subject. So if you want to dig a little deeper, it's pretty easy. You can use this presentation as your base to kind of give more information. Next slide. Demographics are important. This plan goes out to the year 2050. That infographic on the left, I'm sure you've seen many similar infographics come through. You see a population increase of 1.2 million people in the Triangle region and 850,000 jobs. There's a little more detail in that table on the right. You have population on top, the employment on the bottom, and each row you have the county increase. And you can see Durham, the population is going to increase 52%. We have it at 458,000 for 2050. Employment increases even faster at 85%. So we've got a lot of growth ahead of us. Next slide. Land use on these scenarios today, the first scenario you'll see, plans and trends. We're just going to extend the current land use plans and policies out. But on the second two, we're a little more aspirational on one we call shared leadership and all together. And we increase the density and the mix of uses at the universities, hospitals, RTP, and at the employment hubs and travel corridors. So we're increasing that density a little bit. When you look at, when you're trying to reduce congestion, when you're trying to reduce the vehicle miles traveled, land use is one of the most important things, land use and pricing. These are just a couple maps, shots of a map. You can actually go on our website and look a little closer. It shows the employment density on the left. You can see it's the darker the color, the higher the density. And around Duke University Medical Center and downtown, 15501 RTP, a little bit up near the kind of the medical facilities up north on Roxborough Road. You can see where we have a concentration here in Durham County. The population density on the right, again, this is for the year 2050, is a little more spread out, as you can see. But there are some concentrations along those major travel corridors, like 15501 Durham Freeway. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about three scenarios today. We also do one, I call it the no build, but it's called existing plus committed. What that one does is it takes the 2050 population employment and it puts it on our current transportation network. So we can see where the deficiencies are going to be. That's our no build scenario. And then we have two others, the plans and trends. As I mentioned, we're just extending our current land use plans and policies out to year 2050. And we're also adding in the projects that we have in the current long-range plan, the 2045 MTP. If you go the next step up, the shared leadership, that's what we do. We go ahead and we go to that next step in the land use. Remember, we're putting more higher concentration, more mixed use at the employment hubs and the travel corridors. And we're adding in more, a few highway projects, but a lot of transit projects. And then in the last scenario altogether, same land use basically, but we're adding in even more transit. And we're also adding in funding for more bicycle and pedestrian facilities as well. So next slide. I'll go into a little bit of detail here so you know what's in these different scenarios. The existing plus committed, the one I mentioned at no build, no commuter rail, no BRT. This is just transportation network we have today. Includes a few highways. The East End connector should be done pretty soon. It's coming out of the ground, so we include that. So that's the no build. The next one is the plans and trends. Sometimes, maybe you can call this the business as usual, right? It includes commuter rail, but between West Durham and Raleigh out to Clayton at kind of a low service level, eight trains during the morning peak and 2 during the off peak, so 8282. And then it includes, as I said earlier, most of the current roadway projects in the MTP plan. Next slide. So the next step up is the shared leadership. Commuter rail, we have that at a higher level of service, 12 trains during the peak period. So it's 12A, 12A. We're adding bus rapid transit on US 15501 between Durham and Chapel Hill. That goes all the way out to North Carolina Central and out to Durham Tech. We also have high frequency bus service in all the other major corridors. And again, we have about the same mix of highway projects. And then one more, next slide. This is the altogether scenario. This is the last one. This one, we extend the commuter rail out to Mebane, and then we add BRT in 2 more places between downtown Durham and RTP, and we also have it in between Chapel Hill, Durham, and out to RTP. What else do we do that's important? We add more complete streets. So we have more bicycle and pedestrian along our roadways that are rebuilt, bus shelters, stop access, et cetera, to help support transit, and more connector roads. Next slide. We also, anytime we give a bus an advantage, we included that in this altogether scenario. So we have a bus only lane on US 15501, and then NC 147, Durham Freeway, we've added a managed lane from the Easton connector down to I-40, and then the same thing on I-40, out to 15501 out to over to Wake County. We've added a single managed lane. Managed lanes are important because the buses can use that managed lane to have an advantage over the general traffic. We've we've taken some roadways out, especially the ones that kind of go out into the urban, suburban, and the exo-urban areas. NC 54 west of Cardboro, NC 98 east of Durham, NC 751 that goes down to Chatham, and then the Northern Durham Parkway north of I-85. We converted through downtown Durham, the Durham Freeway. We've converted to a 4-lane boulevard, and that would be from Briggs Avenue up to Swift Avenue. We converted the central Durham to one-way pairs to two-way, and we've shifted more roadway funding to maintenance in this. So you can see this last scenario altogether. We've emphasized transit more. We've pulled back on a lot of the roadway widenings and rebuilding. Next slide. So we have those 3 scenarios and plans and trends, shared leadership, and all together. This slide on the left here, or this graph, it shows the change in the vehicle miles traveled, right? So that's a blue stack you see there. It goes up, the VMT. You can go back on that slide. Yeah, it goes back, it goes up on the VMT and the plans and trends, shared leadership. But it actually, the vehicle miles traveled go down in the altogether scenario. And I think that's partly because of the transit that we've added. The vehicle hours traveled go down on all of them. That's because we're reducing the congestion in those. So this is comparing it to the no build scenario. That's the changes. One thing you'll see is in all these scenarios, our VMT and our vehicle hours traveled, our travel time, the travel distance, the overall congestion, they don't change a whole lot. It's hard to change this model. This is a regional model with over 3 million people in it in the year 2050. So you don't see huge changes because we're looking at a large area. But we do see advantages as we move from plans and trends to shared leadership to all together. We see some positive movement in these measurements. Next slide. This is looking at emissions. So across the top, those columns, those are the different scenarios that we have, right? And then if you look to the left, you see the different roads. Those are the emissions, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxides, et cetera. And it shows the changes from the existing plus committed, actually from the existing time, right now 2016 through to the year 2050. In the far right, you see the percent change. And in all those emissions, you'll see a pretty good reduction, except for carbon dioxide, that goes up 16%. The reason these go down is because the efficiency of the vehicles is higher, the CAFE standards, so the miles per gallon of the fleet of vehicles that people are driving, and some of the assumptions about electric and other hybrid vehicles in the fleet. That's one reason. The other reason is declining tailpipe emissions. So when we get the air quality conformity, we are pretty capable of meeting our emissions standards. Next slide. This is an infographic that shows several of the measurements that we have. Again, on the columns that you have the different scenarios. So you have the 3 scenarios on the right. The first column is that it says baseline here, but that's the no build scenario. So if you look at the first line there, it says average commute average auto commute, it improves. It starts at 24 minutes and it goes down to 21 minutes as we go through the different scenarios. Same thing when we look at the delays continues to go down. It goes up a little bit in the last scenario. That's because we pulled out quite a few roadway projects from that. Let's go down a little further. Jobs near transit, they continue to go up. I mean, it's 20-some%. In the no build scenario, we're up to like 60-some% in the altogether scenario on the right. So we see a positive direction in those scenarios. If you go down to the last line, that shows the cost, and you'll see that. Well, let's start with our three scenarios, the plans and trends. You see $3 signs, and then in the shared leadership, you see the same $3 signs plus an additional dollar sign. That's because we're assuming we would add additional funding from, there was an NC First Commission. There was a recommendation that they made for increasing transportation funding in the state of North Carolina. So we're assuming we would draw down some of that funding. And then if you look at the last altogether, it includes, what I just talked about in the shared leadership, plus some type of added local source of funding. And that would be equal to, currently we get a 0.5-cent sales tax for transit. It would be equal to that. Not saying how that would happen or what source it would be, but that's kind of the scale of that additional funding. Next slide. Very quickly, this is, we're looking at the year 2050. If you see orange on that map, that means that roadway is at 100% of capacity. So if the roadway can handle 10,000 vehicles a day, it's up to 10,000 vehicles a day if it's orange. If it's red, it's up to 120% capacity, which you're starting to get some backups. And if you look there, the major corridors, again, that we have I-85, I-40, 15501, the Durham Freeway, US 70, they're all pretty congested in 2050, even with the investment that we've made with the highways. Next slide. One thing I want to make sure we have some measurements and equity. We just produced them in the last several days, so it didn't get into this presentation, but I did want to put some information here to make sure that the folks know that this is a consideration. On average, this is something I got from the Integrated Mobility Division at NCDOT, and this is for North Carolina. And it says on average, communities of color have lower vehicle ownership rates, live further from work, are more likely to depend on public transportation, and are more likely to be involved in a crash as a pedestrian. And if you look, there's some other data there, like the box on the bottom, the far right. The average commute by transit's 43 minutes, but it's only 24 minutes by car. So you can see the disparities, and these are things we need to keep in mind as we begin developing our draft plan. Next slide. There's other measures, and I won't go through all of these. I will tell you there's something called travel choice neighborhoods. What we do is we look at the change in the mode shift, but we look at the mode shift in the neighborhoods that have high levels of transit. And what we see is very positive. We might have, say, 6% overall rider, 6% of the people commute by bus overall in the area. But when you look at it through the travel choice neighborhoods, it'd be about 12 or 13%. Same with biking and walking. Biking and walking might be 5%. It would go up to 12 or 13% along these kind of key travel corridors. And those are also the areas you saw on that map that had the highest density of jobs and population. Next slide. Just to let you know, we've done quite a bit of public engagement. We had a survey. As I mentioned, we have a web page. We've done some online workshops. We continue to present to the local boards and commissions. I know we will present this to the Planning Commission here in Durham, and my colleague Dale McKeel already presented this to the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We haven't done any pop-ups. I don't think we will, given what's going on with COVID and the Delta variant. We do have focus groups. We had our first focus group last night for people, communities of concern. We have 3 more of those. We had a public hearing September 1st, and then we just put a lot of notifications out in public affairs notices. Next slide. I think I've talked about all of this. I've mentioned this at some point or another, so let's just go on to the next slide. These are the next steps. We'll complete our public engagement activities and review our feedback. There's a joint MPO board meeting with the Durham Chapel Cardboro MPO and the Capital Area MPO, CAMPO, which is the MPO over there in Wake County in Raleigh. That's September 29th. Talk about some of these issues. One thing we haven't mentioned yet is this is a joint plan. This isn't just a DCHC plan or a CAMPO plan, it's a joint plan. So our boards meet together periodically to help coordinate that. We want to release a preferred option in October. I will tell you that recently at our board meeting, they directed us to put out 2 different preferred options, 2 drafts. We would start with the traditional draft where, say, 60 or 2/3 of the investment is in highways and maybe 1/3 is in transit. That's usually what we've done. We've usually done it because we're restricted by how the funding can be spent, from state and federal sources. So we're going to put out a traditional preferred option draft plan. We're also going to put out another one that more closely abides with our goals and objectives. And more specifically, those pertain to reducing climate change, to ensuring that we have equitable investments, to the communities of concern, and to make sure that they're also involved in the decision making, and make sure we have a multimodal transportation system. So that's a second preferred option that we'll put out. We'll have 2, as I said. We're almost flipping that earlier investment that I talked about. When I said it was 60-40, we're going to flip that and even more. We're really going to push the transit and the bicycle and pedestrian to help meet the MPO's goals. The only other thing left, I think, to say is that we're coordinating with the Durham County Transit Plan. It's occurring about the same time. And we will coordinate with the Orange County Transit Plan. I know that's not much of your concern, but that's a little bit later in the process. So at that, I'll go ahead and maybe go to the next slide and try to answer any questions.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, Andy put these questions at the end as things to think about or react to. So we'd welcome any comments or discussion this time.
Thanks, Andy and Ellen, for your presentation. Commissioners, questions. If you'd like to react to the questions that Ellen, would you put those questions back up? Can you put those questions back up for a minute?
I think Monica has to do that. It's controllable. Yeah.
While we're doing that, if I could just mention one thing is that the DCHC MPO has a board, and the board is our policy board. And from the Board of County Commissioners, Durham, Commissioner Jacobs is the chair of the DCHC MPO board, and then the alternates are Commissioners Byrne and Commissioner Howerton. So I just want to make sure you knew you had representation, good representation, active representation on our board.
Thank you, Andy. So there are some questions here. Commissioners, would you like to get a response to these questions, or do you have particular questions of your own? With this up, I can't see you. So just let me know.
Hey, Chair Howerton.
Okay, Commissioner Alam, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't have any question regarding what's on the screen right now, but I I really just wanted to thank Ellen and Andy for this presentation and the entire MPO board. This is really helpful for me, who I don't sit on any of the transportation boards, so getting this presentation is very helpful of where we are. One of the priority areas I will say is not necessarily a project, but I know this is something that all of the commissioners probably will agree with, and me and Chair Howerton actually talked about yesterday, is, you know, growing from some of our, from not repeating the same mistakes that we've had in the past, of making sure that we center the voices in these community conversations of people who are dependent on public transportation to be in those community conversations, that we have them as a priority, because they are going to be the ones who are using our public transportation the most, and also individuals who are most dependent on our sidewalks as their main avenue to getting to work. So that would just be an area of high priority for me.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Long. Any response to that?
Well, I just want to make sure you know that the Engage Durham process, they provided us the transportation related comments that they received. I guess it's been over about a year. I know they had the focus groups, they had the workshops, and then they also had a survey, and they provided that information to us. And, you know, that was considered, you know, while we were doing our goals and objectives. So, and I will tell you, probably 80% or more of those comments have to do with transit. So, you know, we're well aware of that. And as I said, we had our first focus group last night, and the concern was transit, and it was transit, not just the high level kind of expensive transit. People want to make sure that we don't forget about the bus service that goes through, you know, all the different neighborhoods. So it was good.
Also, I would add that related to the Engage Durham process and this whole plan is the Durham County Transit Plan, as Andy mentioned. And we're just concluding our second round of engagement and looking at that very closely and preparing a presentation that will come to the board next month. So it'll have a lot more information about that transit specifically and looking specifically at what transit riders have told us. So that's been a focus of that effort, and you'll get more information on that very soon.
Thank you, Ellen. And now go to Commissioner Burns. I just want to say that one of the conversations that keeps bubbling up a lot is around bus stations. That our stations are, as a community, what the community says is they're pretty crappy. And they are wanting to know what's going to be done about those stations, the bus stations. So just a conversation that I think needs to be addressed, because they're not seeing any improvement or very little improvement around bus stations. Commissioner Burns, you want to go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. I will be pretty quick. One of the things that's just always been a high priority for me, because I want to kind of sort of stick to where we are, is making sure, you know, we have this new, a few of us, you know, we're excited about this new aseptic space that we have that's going to allow us to train people for a lot of the good paying jobs that we have here. But then we're expanding all these companies out in Trayburn, and we just don't have routes out there, or we don't have the routes. We don't have the level of routes that we're going to need to kind of sort of meet that need, especially if my colleagues and I are successful in actually getting some of these jobs to folks in Durham, right? I think the other thing, it was brought up when Scott Leventon was here from the RTP Foundation, you know, he kind of sort of elevated this idea, much like what we saw when IBM came when Apple made their announcement about being in Raleigh, it was a force multiplier, right? So we had Grail to say they were going to give us a few more jobs. Fidelity Investments, on the 250 they gave us an additional 500. Just last week, they said we're going to give 3,000 more. Now we do know that some of these will be work from home, but just the capacity for what some of our roads have in Durham, I mean, in RTP on the Durham side, I think is going to be exacerbated in the next 2-3 years. It's not 5-10 years down the road. So I know that those conversations are going to be elevated. Bus stops at our schools, we're still not seeing it. And while this is peripheral to it, we have to have a conversation, I think, just as leaders about, and maybe not so much for you, Ellen and Andy, but maybe have a conversation as leaders in another conversation about how we are supportive of bus drivers. Like bus drivers actually came, not just, I'm not talking about DPS. I try not to bother the stuff that the school board has because I know that they're working very hard. But when we're looking at Orange County offering $4,000 salary advance for buses, they're offering $2,000 for anybody who's doing a referral. That's a big deal for a bus driver, and they'll leave the jobs that they have. We saw locally, we saw people working double and triple shifts this weekend in Durham with our bus station, with some of our folks. Last year, there were some bus drivers that came to leadership, to Durham County Commission, to Durham City Council. This before me and Commissioner Long was there. And one of the things that they asked for was adequate childcare because the buses were still running during the pandemic. So they didn't ask for handouts. They didn't ask for free childcare. All they said was, much like nurses, much like doctors, we still have to work. So we would like access to those spaces. When they did make calls to daycares, they were told, well, no, you're not on the list to actually access one of these spaces because you're not law enforcement, you're not in EMS, so forth and so on. So I bring that up and I elevate it because I want to go back to something that Commissioner Long said. If we're really centering voices, I want to center all the voices that are within the ecosystem of transportations, the riders, the drivers, the administrators. And I think sometimes that we don't always do that. And as we see people doing sick outs, as we see people doing sick outs and not coming to work, as we see these competitive salaries coming out, I just want us to think about those things when we think about transportation. Again, I know it's peripheral to this conversation. Again, my main focus is making sure we can get folks to Trayburn, we can get folks to RTP for these good paying jobs that we're bringing in, and that we have options for people to get to some of our schools. And I'll stop there because I see Jay with his hand up.
Yeah, Jay, could you just, and I don't know how much you want to go into the conversation that we've been having about the northern area. And
to throw that out there.
Yeah, how much
you have been a leader in that, Chair Howerton. There was a meeting that we were on last week where the community asked about it. So before, that's not to say that we haven't been looking at it, because I know that Jay and you have been looking at it. I saw that community meeting. I just wanted to elevate it for this, but yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we just, we hadn't brought it to the board because I don't know if the staff had enough time or information to be ready to present it to the board. So Jay and Ellen, wherever you are with that, and if you want to share.
Sure, Chair Howerton and commissioners, thank you. And I'll be very brief out of respect. I know time is of essence today as well. And certainly we'll come back with more information at a future meeting. We do want to let you know, and I want to offer some very big kudos as a point of personal privilege to Andy and to Ellen. They led a meeting last week. We met with key persons from Merck, from Corning, and other partners out there, and had an excellent conversation. Obviously, part of our first foray is trying to understand what their needs are, how do they do their work, what are their shifts, things like that, because that's going to drive where some of these young folks from the aseptic training facility, what shift will they work, or how will they get an internship or a permanent job. And Ellen and Andy did an excellent job facilitating that. I did sit in on it to listen and to lend support, but I want to give them every credit in that. And that is just the first meeting we're going to have of many, trying to make sure we've got our arms around it. And Ellen has already got some thoughts. And again, we'll come back to you a little more of a presentation here at a future meeting, but already some thoughts on how, okay, the normal 40-foot bus may not work right now, but there's other solutions that can be made available with county transit funding and other sources to help these young folks get there, because it really is that conundrum of, well, once they get one of these great jobs, probably the first thing they do is go see Mark Jacobson or someone and buy a car, and that's fine. That means they're on their way economically. But until then, it does no good to train them if they can't get to work. And so just know that we have already started that process, and we will be back to you. And I just, again, cannot say enough about Andy Miracle and Ellen Beckman and their efforts last week with our partners from Corning, Merck, and other entities at Trayburn. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. So, we have to give kudos to Marlena and some of the folks at Merck and Corning that have been in this conversation from the beginning, and challenging them that if they really wanted to be partners with Durham, that they really want to create relationship with Durham, then this is the way that we can get that started. So the staff took it on, and I appreciate the work that you're doing around this. So if Andy had something, and then I saw Commissioner Jacobs' hand, and then Commissioner Carter. Andy, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Are you referring, Commissioner Howerton, are you referring to me?
Yes.
No. I'm sorry, there was another Andy, so I wasn't sure. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry to you, but if Commissioner Jacobs, if you want to go, it's fine.
Yeah, I also just wanted to note, I'm glad to hear that conversation with Trayburn is happening, because we did put money in the Durham County Transit Plan for on-demand, Uber, Lyft, that type of thing, for people to get to jobs at the northern campus for Trayburn. So I look forward to hearing more about that. I just wanted to give a broader perspective, because hearing comments from my fellow board members about how we really want to focus on the needs of people in our community related to transit, related to investing in bus shelters and sidewalks. We have a big problem in our state, and that's that currently 90% of the transportation funding goes to highways. And so, this was a very big conversation that we had at our MPO board meeting, is that we need very global changes. We need significant changes in the way our state is, and NCDOT is allocating money for transit and bike and pedestrian investments, because locally we do not have the funding to do all the things that we need to do. And so when Andy Henry was just referring to what we directed staff to do, there was a lot of frustration from elected officials from Chatham County, Orange County, Durham City and County at our last meeting, because if you notice from the data that Andy shared, even with the all together scenario, which of course everybody supports, because that scenario has the most investment in transit and bike and pedestrian, that even with that, we see that it's very car oriented, because the data points are vehicle miles traveled and vehicle hours. And it's a lot of folks express frustration because you're not seeing a lot of reduction with carbon emissions, even with the all-together model. And we know we can't, that's not okay. Like, we have to come up with a model and a plan that is actually reducing carbon emissions. And it's very frustrating that we're being asked to come up with something fiscally restrained when again, the fiscal restraint is that 90% of the funding goes to cars. So what we directed Andy and all the staff who've been working so hard, and I just want to give kudos to Andy because we've been really pushing our staff, really pushing them. And Andy has responded. You saw those equity measures. He is just scouring for data to give us so that we can measure different things. Let's measure how the investments are going to help people get to jobs. Like, Commissioner Burns just said, we want to measure that. How is that going to help people, the travel market, the travel, what did you call it, Andy? The travel choice neighborhoods. We need the data to show that this scenario is going to help the folks that we want to get to Treyburn and RTP. We want a scenario that's going to show that less people are getting run over when they're crossing the street. And we want to invest in a scenario that shows that we are reducing carbon emissions. So we don't have a lot of time because we have to approve this by October 1st. But I just wanted to give that perspective that we are really trying to push the envelope, and we're going to need this to be a conversation with other MPOs across the state. And we're going to talk about it with Campo on September 29th, because it can't just be Durham County or our MPO asking for a change in how transportation is funded. It has to be everybody asking for this. So I just wanted to share that perspective.
Commissioner Jacobs, I just want to add too, I think we're talking about two different conversations here. I think we're talking about the larger MPO and perspective, and then we're talking about something that can be done with the partnership of our corporations in the northern area. So I don't want to lose sight of, we're talking about two different narratives here. So I just don't want to lose sight of that, because we've got some partners in the northern area that want to work with us. So let's not lose sight of that. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really love the sound of the conversation, and all of the comments from fellow commissioners, I think, have lined up with my own priorities and my own vision. I'm really excited, even though it sounds like I don't know how in the world we'd ever fund it, but I really am excited about the push that the MPO has made to ask the MPO staff to come up with this sort of stretch preferred alternative that flips around the mode share, even though they're not currently paying for that. So I don't know how we'll pay for it, but the very first thing is to, be able to visualize it, to see it, to say this is what it would cost. And I really appreciate that perspective that Wendy was providing with the different metrics too, not just vehicle miles traveled and hours traveled, but we have got to reduce the carbon emissions. We have got to get people out of our cars and onto transit or onto some active form of transportation with our own feet or other wheels that aren't motorized. So I just would say, in answer quickly to those questions, I hold up as priority projects any that do that shift the mode of transportation to transit or to biking and walking, and also that decrease the pedestrian crashes, a form of violence in our community that we don't talk enough about, and it disproportionately affects communities of color. The pedestrian crashes and even the car crashes. I am really in favor of complete streets. The commuter rail and bus improvements and bus rapid transit, we've got to do it all. We're going to have to find the resources to do all of that, because every single piece of that is important, and every piece of that is important for promoting equity. And then the last thing I would say is, if I'm pulling out one specific project, I loved the idea, and when we had a presentation on it from DDI a while back, but converting 147 to a boulevard. I think that would be amazing for our community in a number of ways. And perhaps it would help reconnect the Hayti area and the downtown area, and just make it all more vibrant. And people hate driving on 147. So anyway.
All right. So thank you, Commissioner Carter. Thank you, Andy and Ellen. Is there anything else for you? We've got about 30 seconds. Anything else for you from this conversation?
No, but just thank you for your comments. I heard them, got notes, and I appreciate the time and I welcome the comments. They're great.
Thank you so much. Yeah. All right, commissioners, we will move on to our next item. The next item is 210518, the Board of Programming Assessment update. This will be Derek Bowman's Director of Elections on the line to share a presentation.
So good afternoon, commissioners. This is Perry Mann's Assistant General Manager. Derek will be chiming in shortly, but thanks for your time this afternoon. This update is a response to a recent presentation done by Board of Elections in May, where they came to you guys and requested a study based on some concerns they had with the current Board of Elections facilities, just primarily based on, our population's growth as well as the current state of elections. And so the big takeaway today is this information that's being shared with you. We're not asking you to take any action today. We're asking that you hear this information for your information or awareness only. Our intent is to come back and further discuss the recommendations that you're going to hear in our upcoming CIP presentations. And that gives our CIP committee an opportunity to vet these project recommendations against some of the other competing interests that the county has. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Charles Nicholson from R&D Architects. That is the local firm that we have selected to do this programming assessment on behalf of Board of Elections. So thank you.
Thank you, Perry, and good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Charles Nicholson, principal with R&D Architects. And thank you for your time and interest in the Board of Elections programming study. Working with Derek and his team has been a real eye-opener for us, especially those who are not participating in elections other than going and voting as a citizen. Elections are complicated, and you all know that as being elected officials, but Derek and his team do an amazing job of pulling together a very complicated process. So next slide, a brief overview of the study. The stakeholders here, you all are, the commissioners are a stakeholder in this, along with the county manager's office, county engineering, general services, the Board of Elections, and then the citizens of Durham County. Next slide. The project team, so working with the engineering folks, Perry, Brenda, and Jim, Board of Elections, Derek and his staff, Daniel and David, Brenda and Alan, and then R&D Architects, myself and Glenn Parks, project manager, and then Engineered Designs, Ginger Scoggins provided MEP engineering support to the project. Next slide. So our project goals to address the Board of Elections space needs and support their mission, which is to conduct free and fair elections in Durham County, to identify those issues that are associated with operating for multiple facilities, to reduce their need on temporary and borrowed facilities, to understand the security issues related with the Board of Elections operations and how their current facilities support or do not support a safe work environment. And finally, explore the impact of future space needs to accommodate increasing regulation and the population growth, which we just talked about in the previous presentation, which will result in more voters, which means more precincts, which means more equipment, more supplies, more ballots. So next slide. So our study methodology, we conducted a series of meetings, interviews with Board of Election and engineering staff. We had site visits of their existing facilities. And then we took that information to assess their needs and applied space planning standards to that, which led us to develop some general options on how to address their space needs. So next slide. All of this then is included in the report, which is being finalized as we speak, but includes an executive summary and our key findings. So, next slide. So what did we learn? Board of Elections is currently located in 2 buildings. Their downtown offices are on the ground floor of the Judicial Annex building on Roxborough Street, and their other half of them are on the Operations Center, which is located on South Alston Avenue. Board of Elections downtown office space is woefully undersized, and recently it was made even smaller by the renovations on the 2nd and the 3rd floors for the North Carolina Department of Public Safety. Current uses at this facility include the public's point of access to Board of Elections for services, the Board of Elections front door. Also, most of their administrative offices are there, and then there's some limited use for the election operations portion of their function, which, due to the lack of space, they spread election operations between this office, the operations center, and then temporary facilities. Next slide. So here's a floor plan of the Judicial Annex building, the ground floor. The purple areas here, they indicate those areas used for election operations. The green is the administrative offices. The blue area is the public entrance for Board of Elections. And then everything that's in white is either not usable because of the layout of this building, or is being shared with the 2nd and 3rd floor tenants for exits and entrances, etc. The usable square footage here is about 4,281 square feet. Next slide. So this is the operations center. It's located in a multi-tenant leased warehouse space that was not configured for Board of Elections operations. Current uses at this facility is the warehousing of all their supplies, overflow of administrative offices, people that don't fit in the downtown space, and then the election operations, which this space was never designed for this kind of use. So it is problematic, at least. Next slide. This is a plan of the operations center, and some of the major issues we discovered here were the main entrance, which is at the top of the plan where the arrow is there, leads through a loading dock directly into an active warehouse, which is a safety concern. And it is it's not an accessible entrance. The second entrance, which is on the far right side of the plan, is quite remote, is also not accessible, and also leads directly into an active warehouse. The entire building is not conditioned, so there is no air conditioning in this warehouse except for in the office space located in the center of the building. So this doesn't support the storage of paper goods such as ballots, nor does it support the storage of electronics such as voting equipment. So it's not suitable for the type of use that it's being asked to be completed here. Also, the training room, which is the large room with the number 5 in it, this room is the training room, the Board of Elections boardroom, a meeting room, a post-election meeting space, a pre-election setup space. It only has one means of egress, which is a code violation to have that number of people in a room with only one exit, which then leads through a warehouse. And finally, the Unity Room, which is the smaller room on the far left side with the number 4 in it, is where all the votes are tabulated. This room essentially should be a transparent room with windows so that election observers and the media can readily observe the tallying of votes, which cannot happen in this layout here. While the gross area of this floor plan is 14,000 square feet, the space also includes all the electrical and building equipment controls for the adjacent tenants. So it leaves a net square footage of about 10,400 square feet. Next slide. Here's some photos of the operations center. The warehouse is full of all the supplies and records. The supplies are all utilized to set up and equip the 57 polling places that Board of Elections sets up for every election. On the left side, you'll see photos of stored supplies. Due to the lack of space, the Board of Election utilizes high pile storage, which is a code violation in this building, as the building's fire protection system is not designed to accommodate high pile storage. And on the right side, the larger photo you see there is high pile storage, once again, of the record storage area, which is overfilled at the moment and probably will be due to state mandated records holds. Next slide. A couple more photos of the operations center. These were taken during an election. On the left, you'll see photos of staff preparing equipment and supplies prior to the election day. And on the right side is a large photo of the media setup in the loading dock area to cover those returns. And the boardroom and the Unity Room, which is all supposed to be visible and open to the election observers, are located through the closed doors on the far right side. Next slide. So these two facilities are located 4 miles apart, which is a 8 to 12 minute drive, depending on your route. This results in a loss of productivity for BOE staff. It also creates unnecessary security concerns, as sensitive documents, voter registration forms, ballot requests, voted ballots, unvoted ballots are transported back and forth from one facility to the other. Next slide. And so due to this lack of space, Board of Election utilizes temporary facilities. Most recently, the Admin 2 building to conduct election operations during an election. And while Admin 2 is conveniently located directly across the street from the Roxborough Street downtown offices, setting up temporary operation creates a lot of issues. One small example, during the 2020 general election, Board of Elections incoming mail, which includes thousands of mail-in ballot requests, returned ballots, and just general mail, all arrives at the Judicial Annex building. These were then placed all in large carts, rolled down the street into the Admin 2, where they were sorted and processed in 2 different rooms within Admin 2. And then they were placed back into rolled carts and rolled back down the street to the Judicial Annex building, where then some of them were then put into carts and taken back over to the operations center. This poses serious security concerns for both the staff and operations. Plus, in today's politically charged environment, this could result in an undesirable perception of voter manipulation and fraud, ballots being pushed around in big carts down the street. Next slide. On election days, Board of Election also utilizes tents to set up in their parking lot to provide supplies for polling places, as there's simply just not adequate space within the warehouse to accommodate this need. Next slide. So what does the Board of Elections actually do? Their primary functions are to plan, furnish, equip, and staff polling places, and to educate and train election officials, to process ballot requests, prepare all the voting equipment, certify ballots, tabulate the results, conduct and investigate voting irregularities, recounts, maintain voter registration, registration rolls, and to educate the public on information about voting in elections. Next slide. To function properly, Board of Election needs adequate space. Their current usable footage, square footage is slightly less than 14,800 feet. Their program net need is 27,800 square feet, suggesting they need an additional 13,000 net square feet of program space. Next slide. To function properly, Board of Election also needs to address safety and security concerns. The noted building and fire code violations, such as the high pile storage and the lack of fire exits at the operations center. These things need to be addressed to create a safe work environment. Also, violent threats against election workers is increasing. A recent study by the Brenham Center found that 1 in 3 election officials feel unsafe because of their jobs, and nearly 1 in 5 have named threats to their lives as a job-related concern. Next slide. The need for improving election services is trending. Election officials in several North Carolina counties have already started to or have expanded their facilities, included Buncombe County. It's working on expanding their existing offices. Catawba County has moved into newly renovated space. It used to be an animal shelter. New Hanover County is moving to a larger county. Union, they're doing a multi-phase renovation and expansion. And Wake County has moved into a new 76,000 square foot renovated warehouse space. So next slide. What are our findings? The summary of our space needs study is that Board of Elections needs 27,800 net square footage. That plus the gross up factor and 10% factor for future growth results in a total building area around 43,000 gross square feet. Next slide. So Board of Elections operations can be divided into 5 functional categories. The public spaces, those are the lobby, reception, early voting, one-stop voting, curbside voting spaces that are open to the public. The administration offices, that's secure offices for their current staff of 11, but a temporary staff that is 91 individuals, so it needs to be flexible administrative space. Then there's the election operations. This is the bulk of their need. This includes the boardroom, the unity room, the pre-post-election training rooms, volunteer spaces. Board of Election utilizes over 1,600 volunteers to conduct an election. And then there's the warehouse spaces for all this equipment, the staging area, long-term record storage, and the secure ballot storage. And then building system areas is required to maintain a building. So next slide. So this is a conceptual floor plan diagram prepared to show the critical adjacencies and for budgeting planning purposes. So on the blue at the top is the public spaces. The election operations is in the center there in the purple with more controlled access. The warehouse is in the red. That's a much more secure area. And then the administrative offices are a secure space with access to all of the 3 of the other systems, functional areas. Next slide. Site plan utilized also for planning, showing we need about 7.6 acres to accommodate Board of Election needs. Next plan, next slide. I'm stuck on plan. So we've developed 3 options here. The first option here is to build these are preliminary options. So the first one is if we went and build a brand new facility on a new piece of property. So we'd need about 43,000 square feet, new building, 7.6 acres. Assuming that land can be found, this could be completed by January of 2025 for about $31 million is our preliminary estimate. Next option, next slide, please, is the second option. And this is to just look at a new leased facility. So go find a flex office space of around 45,000 square feet that has enough parking and loading dock spaces. And assuming that such a space is available, this possibly could be completed by August 2023, which is prior to the beginning of the next general election cycle. And our estimate on this is around 21 million, does not include any of the leasing costs associated with that. And the next slide, please. And this option would be the phased approach option, which is to lease 25,000 square feet of new office space to move the public spaces, the administrative offices, and the election operations into. This would vacate the Judicial Annex building and put these three functions all together in one new facility, a leased facility, which, if assuming that also too could be found right away, that could be completed by August of 2023. And then phase two would be go back to the existing lease space for the operations center on South Alston Avenue and renovate that for use as a warehouse and to remove the code violations that are there. Ideally, the new lease space would be adjacent or near the existing operations center on Alston Avenue, so that those two facilities would not be separated by 4 miles. However, having them separated is not ideal. And so that's the 3 options that we came up with to kind of just start this discussion. And I think the next slide is just our question slide. So, and I don't, Derek, if you wanted to jump in and fill in where I drop things, that would probably be good.
Okay. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. We can. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Thank you, Charles, for the presentation. I think Charles captured it very well. What we're dealing with, I think our chair, Dawn Baxton, also during her presentation some weeks ago to the Board of Commissioners, also expressed these concerns. I just want to reiterate, this is a huge operation. This is not, you all see the landing. You don't see what goes into it. And I'm not saying that in any way to sound facetious or mean, but it is a very, very detailed and a very laborious process that many people have no clue about. Many people still think we work part-time. This is very much a full-time job. There is a substantial amount of logistics. I would venture to guess our department is at close to the top in terms of materials and items that we have to maintain in this county. So I really, really implore the commissioners on behalf of the board, safety of staff, increased violence towards election workers, security pitfalls we're going through right now to really, really consider prioritizing, and I know you're not making a decision today, the Board of Elections. This is critical to our operations, and we appreciate your sincere consideration.
Thank you, Derek. And thank you, Charles, for the presentation. I'm going to open up for commissioners' comments or questions. Commissioner Jacobs?
Yes, thank you so much for this report and this study. I guess, my concern is just that when are we going to start planting the money trees? Because this is not in our CIP. And also, I know we also have the other big item that's not in our CIP, which is a new animal shelter. That's something that came up about 1.5 years ago. So I guess, you know, I would like to hear from Claudia or from our interim manager, Hager, just what you suggest as an approach. Obviously, luckily we have some options that are least expensive versus very. You know, I think we're going to have to look at, obviously we want to meet the needs of our Board of Elections. But, you know, and I appreciate that you've given different options that, you know, to look at, and there's probably going to have to be some compromise solutions. I personally am not opposed to renting. I know the county has gotten away from leasing over the 3 terms that I've been on. There has been an emphasis on not leasing, but the flip side of owning is you have to maintain. And so I guess one of my questions, Mr. Nicholson, is has there been any looking at, or maybe our own staff needs to look at, you know, leasing versus owning in terms of the ongoing maintenance costs as well, because when you lease, then you don't have to do some of the maintenance. So on the flip side of that, so yes, go ahead.
Commissioner Jacobs, those are the kinds of questions that we will sort through as we develop the overall CIP plan for the board. Your opening remarks that where's the money tree? You know, we are looking for it, have not found it yet. And it's a compounded problem with the cost of construction in general. So not only are we having some high priority projects that are required based on needs for various reasons, this is probably one of the most expensive times in looking at, well, at projects. And so it's a compounded issue, and how do we afford this timing wise, et cetera. You know, elections, our board has been quite responsive over the years in trying to meet election needs. However, you know, from moving, you know, where they were off of Foster to where they are now, but we do need to plan longer term for growth and make sure they are in adequate space. Your comments about leasing versus owning, those are areas that we will look at, because leasing gets expensive, and it's the same with owning your own house compared to renting one. Although the landlord will do some things, there's still quite a bit you as the leasee have to do as well. And so as we present an option and plan to the board, we will have to look at both of those factors. What is the total cost long term? And just like the space that we're in now, I think it was a 5-year lease, but sort of what happens when that stops? What do we do? There's price escalations, et cetera, when you could have sort of bit the bullet and bought something and not have at least that issue, and we can finance it cheaper than leasing it. So it's lots of factors that we will weigh. This is going to be a tough period for staff, our budget team, finance team, and all construction, as we try to balance which project goes first. And we will look at, you know, statutorily what's required, and most important with elections, making sure they have the right space that protects the safety of the staff, as well as ensuring it has all the other components that are needed for them to do their work seamlessly.
Right. And one option, thank you, Manager Hager, I didn't see on there was, instead of us, you know, buying the land and building a building, but is there something that we can buy and retrofit to our needs? If that would also be a possible option. the other question I had was, is there any other available funding sources, whether it be state funding or out there? I don't know.
And Derek can answer that question, but there has just not been the support around elections for infrastructure type needs. I know at one point there was a big push from local elected offices to get more support for equipment. And but Derek can respond to that, but I don't believe there is any, and there are some limits on what you can accept as far as funding related to election type infrastructure. And I think that has even been narrowed even more. At least there have been efforts to narrow that window even more with external funding. And I'll let him respond.
So I'll say that, thank you, Manager, that there would not be any state funding available certainly to assist with this, but as the commission accepted, there was a private grant from the Center for Tech and Citywide assisted the county in providing the Board of Elections necessary supplies related to COVID and other matters to execute the 2020 general election. So I don't want to say that there isn't any opportunity potentially out there with the county for elections specifically. But it is only towards state funding at this time.
So Derek, first I want to say thank you, and thank you, Charles, for this presentation. And Derek, you do such a superb job for Durham County. We want to always acknowledge and appreciate you and your staff for the work that you do. And I know this has been a conversation that we've had for a while now, and the Manager Hager is looking, and staff is looking into the options that are available to you. So I'm sure that the finance department and all of you will be combing the weeds to see what is the best option for us to move forward with, given that this is something that is necessary. As somebody reported this morning, we're looking at 59% growth in year 2050. We're going to have to do something, and we want to be able to support our Board of Election and the staff that works there and get the work done for us. So if there are any other questions or concerns, if not, one of our commissioners has requested break. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. I mean, was there anything else that you needed from us before I go there? Is there anything else you need from us today? Perry, Derek?
Negative, Chair Howerton. That's what we need. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, this is for your information only. We'll be coming back to you with recommendations at our upcoming CIP presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll take a 15-minute break, commissioners. We'll be back at 1:30. And then we've got a 30-minute presentation for the ARPA funds. And then we'll try and end by 2 o'clock. So let's take a 15-minute break and be back at 1:30. Okay, it looks like we've got, excuse me, everyone except Mr. Burns back.
Yes, ma'am. That's what it looks like on my screen. Oh, she's back.
Okay. All right, great. So we had a little bite to eat, I'm sure. So we're going to move on with our interim manager, Claudia Hager, on the next item is 210546 American Rescue Plan Act and an update, and our interim manager will take it from here.
Great, commissioners. We are here today to give you an update on the American Rescue Plan Act. And as you know, we continue to learn more about next steps as the U.S. Treasury gives guidelines, as we find more insight from the state. And we remain also in a window of awaiting additional information as well. Jody Miller, General Manager Miller, and General Manager Deborah Craig-Way will join in presenting the presentation. We'll try to cover our materials within about 10 minutes and give the board some time for questions, but we're hoping to move this along within a 20-minute time frame. The city council is also getting an update today on the American Rescue Plan Act. I will say we're probably one of the few jurisdictions I've heard about that are sort of collaborating like we are on certain processes. So that is great. It also makes it tricky at times, but we're grateful for the partnerships we have between both jurisdictions. And so I'll pass it now to Jody.
Thank you, Manager Hager. Good afternoon, board members. I'm going to go over the first 10 or so slides with you. You've seen these slides before, but just as a refresher, we talked about them during the August work session. Then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Deborah Craig-Ray, and she's going to talk about specifically some engagement work around the county is looking to host in the upcoming months. We're going to provide you some background information and updates of the current engagement work to date. We've also been working on a rubric of sort of how we evaluate proposals and requests for funding that we'll share with you today. This is just the first part of a conversation, which we'll do more of an in-depth dive on September 27th. And then we'll wrap it up and have an opportunity for questions and answers and discussion for the board. So Monica, if you will advance to the next slide, we will get started. So just a reminder, Durham County will receive about $62.4 million, half of which we received in the spring. The city of Durham will receive $51.8 million as part of the American Rescue Plan Act that was approved in the spring of 2021. Next slide, please. A few key dates we just want to keep in front of you as we continue to talk about these dollars. Two of the big ones that we need to be mindful of as we plan for expenditures and look at proposals is by December 31st, 2024, all funds must be incurred and obligated. And this is of the entire amount that Durham County will be receiving. And all funds must be expended and the work must be completed by December 31st, 2026. Next slide, please. The U.S. Treasury has provided guidance on primary ways that counties may invest their ARPA funds. They include supportive public health response, addressing negative economic impacts, replacing public sector revenue loss, premium pay for essential workers, water and sewer infrastructure, and broadband infrastructure. Next slide, please, Monica. To date, the county has earmarked $5.1 million of our allocation for some of these ongoing COVID-related costs. Those things were included in the current year budget. Everything from janitorial contracts for cleaning standards that we need to have at our public buildings, continuing screening at our buildings, and support for everything from our vaccine equity program with our community health workers to supporting our school nurses and support of minority business community infrastructure. Next slide, Monica. Of course, you're going to hear us continue to make this point and bring it to the forefront of our discussions with ARPA is the grant compliance. We need to make sure that procurement and contractual obligations align with our uniform grant guidelines. In order to do that, it's important to keep good and accurate records for the compliance piece of this, and the ARPA funds will be reported on the single audit annually. Next slide, Monica. The board has been discussing over the last several months some guiding principles as we think about prioritizing our spending of our ARPA funds. And so here are the next two slides. We'll just review those guiding principles with you once again, giving prioritization to those projects and proposals that align with the board's strategic plan and capital plans and other assessments the board has endorsed, looking at opportunity to leverage the ARPA funds with federal, state, and local dollars, looking at prioritizing funding that addresses equity, everything from health disparities to closing the achievement gap, infrastructure to support the unincorporated areas of the county, and funding to support minority-owned businesses. Also evaluating our infrastructure needs in terms of the compliance piece, making sure that we've got processes and procedures and people power in place to make sure that we have the compliance and we're able to do the compliance at the level that's required for the ARPA dollars. Establishing a framework for our community discussions and input and coordinating these discussions and engagement with our community partners when possible. And we'll talk a little bit more about our work to date on that in just a few minutes. Next slide, Monica. Looking at opportunities for continued FEMA reimbursement and making mindful decisions about those things that qualify for FEMA reimbursement, seeking those first, and then using our ARPA dollars on things that don't qualify for FEMA reimbursement in terms of response to the pandemic. Also looking at identifying strategic one-time projects, or if they're not one-time projects to fund, what are the sustainability opportunities and strategies for things that go beyond the timeline for when the federal funding can be used. And then the last piece is establishing our rubric to evaluate and rank projects to make sure that we're having the highest use of these funds are achieved. As we keep talking about this as once in a generation funding, we want to make sure that we're really leveraging this money and funding to meet the needs of the Durham community. Next slide. And here's just a quick reminder of some of the, or examples of some of the areas through our budget discussions where we've identified potentially investing some of the county's dollars, everything from workforce development to continuing with our food insecurity work and housing insecurity work, pre-K and K through 12 initiatives, broadband support, just to name a few. Next slide, Monica. Phase one of our community engagement, the board is aware that we've had two meetings, joint meetings with the city of Durham this summer, one in June and one in August. The first joint engagement event was a budget healing event where there was discussions on and focus areas on health, housing, education, and employment and entrepreneurship. The second joint city-county engagement took place on August 5th. That meeting provided an opportunities for participants to give feedback on submitted ARPA funding proposals and suggestions made by residents. The work of starting to group these proposals and requests by categories is ongoing, and also an opportunity to give feedback about areas where we just may have missed. There hasn't been any sort of formal requests or proposals submitted. So this is ongoing work that the city is doing and also providing the information where it overlaps to the county as well. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Deborah Cagray. Deborah.
Thank you so much, Jody, and good afternoon, commissioners and interim manager Hager. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline for our community engagement review and funding process. As you know, community engagement is a strong value for your board. In Durham, we like to have as many voices at the table as possible. And as you've heard, we started with two joint meetings where we engaged the community in understanding what this once in a generation level of funding was about, how it could be used, and how it could impact our community for many years to come. And so we've had the first phase, as you see there. We are preparing now to move into phase 2, which will involve Durham County staff working in the community, mostly county outside the city limits, to have some meetings and to hear from those citizens what their priorities are. Also during this period into next month, we will continue to do some internal engagement, hearing from our department heads and our staff what our needs are as it relates to the categories of funding. Also in this period, from now to the end of the year, we will go through what we call the review period. And that's when our budget staff and others will begin to review the proposals that have come in. And to the extent necessary, we will develop steps for RFPs when we have those headed back into us. In terms of the allocation phase, again, that goes through from November to December. And that's when we will bring to your board proposed funding options. That would be for county-only projects as well as any joint city and county projects. And then certainly the last period, but a very important period, will be the period of evaluation that will start at the beginning of next year, January 22 and beyond. And that will be where we will begin to measure the impact of the investments and make recommendations on how to use any funds that remain after this first period. Monica, next slide. So let me just mention a little bit about the timeline for the county only. Again, we will work on phase 1 engagement topics that require further vetting and input. And then again, we are going out into the unincorporated areas of the communities. My staff has been talking and working on some of the locations that we might consider as we do this work. You will see that our first meeting scheduled for September 30th is going to be virtual. We really are hopeful that we can actually physically go into the community for the October meeting. But of course, that will depend on what is going on with the pandemic, specifically the Delta variant, and how that is progressing. And then, of course, November 4th, we will have our final virtual meeting. Next slide. So I'm just going to briefly touch on the engagement highlights from the 2 meetings that we had previously. So this is just a quick summary of the feedback that we received as a result of those 2 meetings. We actually heard from 300 plus citizens that responded to the surveys. And as I said, Durham values the voice of its residents. And so I thought that was very positive, a very good start. And then of course, as a result of that work, we've had 80 community proposals that have been submitted. So that is where we are in terms of our highlights to date. And as you know, that will continue to go up. Jody, I think you're next.
Thank you, Deborah. Commissioners, you saw the slide just a few minutes ago. This is a list that provides guidance on what the U.S. Treasury has provided to us in terms of how our ARPA dollars can be spent and what items they can be spent on. I just wanted to briefly remind you of this as we go to the next slide. So Monica, if you'd move us to the next slide. To give you sort of a preliminary and high-level view of some of the work we've done to date on the engagement side of it, this slide represents the feedback we've received from those being engaged with our process, either through surveys or proposals, as to their ranking of prioritization order based on the criteria set forth by the U.S. Treasury. So you can see economic impacts coming in number 1, then public health, broadband, premium pay, revenue replacement, and water and sewer infrastructure is also with us as well. So that just gives you sort of a snapshot of the information to date. And a lot of the survey information as well, the proposals are still being reviewed by staff. Next slide, Monica. Core services identified in our resident engagement to date as well, based on the work we've done over the summer, include focusing on health, benefits of public health and wellness, and access to public benefits, especially for those disenfranchised people most impacted by COVID-19. Housing is an issue, as we know, in preventing displacement of people in legacy neighborhoods in support of community development goals. Education, restore and expand education and caregiving infrastructures has also been identified based on some of the engagement work and discussions we've had to date. And then also employment, connecting workers with good jobs and careers, and support of current and future minority business owners as well. Next slide, Monica. So board members, for our brief discussion today and a more in-depth discussion on our September 27th meeting, we presented a draft rubric that gives you a sense as to all the factors we've been talking about regarding priorities and issues we need to consider in terms of evaluating requests for funding, and how that works into meeting your goals and the capital plan goals, as well as the assessments that you support. So I'm going to briefly sort of walk you through this, and certainly can answer any preliminary questions, but we are going to spend more time, sort of in-depth time, discussing this at our September 27th meeting. So the first area or category looks at just eligibility. You've heard me twice in this presentation mention U.S. Treasury guidelines. They have not been finalized yet. We're hoping that they will be finalized this month. And so once we have that final list, we'll be able to make sure that any requests or priorities align with what we're allowed to use the ARPA funding for. We've mentioned the compliance issue many times, and we'll continue to do that in future discussions about ARPA, but making sure that whatever's being requested or proposed meets our uniform grant guidelines and the areas we've identified in our priorities as well. We've got the strategic planning side of it, as well as how it aligns with priorities of the board, our capital improvement plan, any assessments that you've endorsed. The complexity category really looks at that time frame that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We've got very specific deadlines for when the money has to be allocated and then when it has to be spent and the work has to be completed. So making sure whatever moves forward is able to meet those timeline eligibility requirements. We also have categories looking at how it benefits the community and the level of collaboration that it's proposing to get the work done, either as a service or a project. Equity is also an important value for Durham, and that's going to be included in our rubric as well as we evaluate the proposals and requests. Evidence of sustainability. In this case, it really speaks to the longer term resource investment that it would require to continue the program or service. We've talked about this being once in a generation funding, and there'll be a short window of time for this funding to be used, but what happens after that funding is no longer available? And are there one-time opportunities to make significant investments that really make an impact on the board's priorities? Or are there other things that we need to make investments in and find possible strategies for future funding as well? We've also included environmental sustainability in this draft rubric, something that the board has been committed to, and something as we think about, especially some of the infrastructure projects, how does this align with your goals for environmental sustainability and our efforts towards reusable resources moving forward? And the final area is the performance evaluation. And this is about collecting the data, looking at the metrics, are we achieving our outcomes? It's going to be important, one, as we evaluate the sustainability long-term of the services and programs, but it's also going to be important in the compliance side of it as well. Next slide, Monica. I mentioned equity as an important category in our rubric as we think about how we evaluate proposals and requests. This provides you a copy of the engagement tool that the city will be using, and we'll be using something very similar to what they're using. That kind of gives you an understanding of some of the questions they'll be asking and some of the information gathering to evaluate this criteria. Next slide, Monica. And I'm going to turn it back over to Deborah.
Thank you, Jody. So, Chair Howerton, I heard you give credit to my colleague Jay Gibson a little while ago. One of his Gibson-isms is OPM, other people's money. And so I'd ask you to kind of think about that as we go over this particular slide, because what we're really trying to do is leverage the funds that we have with other funds that we may be able to get from the state. I reached out to Adam Pridemore and Amber Harris of NCACC last week, just to get some feedback from them about where we were, of course, with the state's budget, and then the types of requests and suggestions that organization is making as we work on using these funds. So what you have here is just a part of a memo that was sent to all the budget conferees asking for their support to help counties maximize the impact of the ARPA funds. And certainly what's important is that we get our budget approved and that we use the General Assembly efforts to incentivize county ARPA investments in shared infrastructure priority projects. Those will be things like broadband, water and sewer, economic development, and more, and work through a local match program. And so again, that would be a priority. And also the request was made by NCACC to retain funding so that they can provide technical assistance to help counties maximize the impact of this money. And so while we have very strong staff who can work with us to make sure we are complying with everything that U.S. Treasury is requested, there are some other counties that don't have quite the resource level that we have. And so that was one reason for that request. Also, lawmakers were asked to support flexibility for counties to improve access to affordable broadband. I know you've heard Manager Hager talk before about the things that we are working on here in Durham County. And of course, you know from some of my legislative reports that the GREAT program and there are other pieces of legislation that are being considered that will help us improve broadband to those parts of our communities that are not well connected, and that is a priority. So that is basically where we are with our assistance from NCACC. I will add that today at 4 o'clock, many of us will be on what we call our manager's call. And at that time, we're due to hear from NACO's legislative director on the impact of the federal funds on ARPA federal funds on the federal level, as well as the state level, where we will hear from a UNC School of Government professor who will talk about, again, additional information to help us manage this important process. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that your staff is staying on top of everything that comes out to make sure that we manage this money well. Thank you. Jody?
Thank you, Deborah. If you'll move to the last slide, Monica. And this is it. And we are running out of time. So just reminders and next steps. So our federal and state guidance will continue to come in future months. And as Deborah mentioned, we're going to get some more information this afternoon. We hope to get some final guidance from U.S. Treasury this month. We'll continue to coordinate with the city of Durham and evaluating those ARPA projects that were submitted through the phase 1 engagement piece this summer. You'll see on the September 13th meeting a budget amendment coming forth, recognizing the current amount of ARPA funds that has been transferred to the county. And then we'll do a more in-depth follow-up discussion on our draft rubric at our September 27th board meeting. And so that is all we have today. Manager Hager, I'll turn it back over to you and to the board for further discussion and questions.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to Jody and Deborah and our budget team and finance team and all the others that are helping us with this as we navigate this, and as well also the partnership with the City of Durham staff. Commissioners, we are open for questions. I know this took some time to go over, but important stuff, and we will have a follow-up conversation in the month, as Jody shared.
Well, I think Jody and Deborah need to exhale. Just breathe. Just breathe for a minute. This is incredibly a lot of information and a lot of work that you are and your staff and the staff is doing. And Manager Hager is incredible. All the work that is having to be put into this, and we appreciate it. We only have a couple of minutes. So I know that you said you're going to come back to us again. So if we have questions, we can ask those at another time, because I think this deserves more time than we have today. So you said it's coming back to us again when?
Right now we have it scheduled for the 27th regular session meeting. And I guess over the past several months, we have come to the board either once or twice a month for updates, depending upon information we have. And so we'll coordinate with you in scheduling the time.
Thank you. So commissioners, do you have any burning questions that you feel you have to get answered today? Or can they wait for the next presentation? We've got one more item that we have to vote on today before we end the meeting. And we have 5 minutes to get that done. We've got 5 minutes to end the meeting at 2 o'clock. So
mine is very quick.
Okay. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair Overton. Yeah, I just had a quick question. If there are community members who want to submit proposals, what is the process for them to use? Like, where should they send those?
That's a good question. Right now, the proposals were submitted through the city's portal. We will have an opportunity for proposals to be submitted through the county process, which will be a little bit later. We're first going to see what we have through the city's process and the joint process. Proposals that are related to the county, we will evaluate to give recommendations to the board on how to proceed, which more than likely will be an RFP process. The component with that is the nuance with that is that the language with federal dollars and state dollars, you have to follow the uniform grant guidelines. For us, that means RFPs, or if it's a joint project with the city that we have agreed upon, it maybe you don't have to do an RFP, but there still have to be certain thresholds. But on the chart with the timeline, you will see on a few slides back when we will make recommendations to the board, which should be next month, October. And we'll say, well, for instance, for broadband, we recommend doing an RFP process for XYZ. Areas related to childcare or another service, we recommend this partnership with the city because they've also prioritized. So we're still working through this. It's a great problem to have, but I know it's also frustrating for residents or individuals that may want to apply. But so I hope that's helpful, but we will make that clearer soon.
Claudia, what's the timeline? By when? What's the drop dead date for people to get applications in or proposals in?
To us, we've not established that, Commissioner Howerton. Now, are you talking about the drop deadline to use the money overall?
No, for citizens to get proposals in to us.
Well, we've not established that yet.
Okay.
Because the county, we tagged along with the city's process. So what they'll do is pass to us proposals that came through their process. And then we will then evaluate what was there. And then the board can determine what type of RFPs they would like to do. Because based on our guidelines, you have to do an RFP process to seek proposals in order for it to be an expense that we can charge against the ARPA funds. Now, for other funding, you don't have to have those sort of exact and strict rules. But for this, we have to follow our guidelines that relates to bidding for projects, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Jacobs, okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate this presentation and especially the rubric that has been proposed to us. I'm just wondering, would you like us to email you, Manager Hager and Jody and Deborah with any feedback related to that? I think the rubric is really important, especially if any recommendations are going to be made soon. So I know we don't have time now, but should we just email any feedback related to the rubric?
Yes, ma'am. Please email some feedback. We'll also provide explanations with the categories, so there's some understanding about the context as well.
Okay, but I really appreciate that. And my second question is and I'm really thrilled that we're going to be really making an effort to get out into the unincorporated areas. Are we being very clear with folks about what the guidelines are and the principles are and things like that? Because, you know, I mean, getting 80 proposals already, I am concerned that the community does understand that there are very strict guidelines and processes related to this funding and how the decisions will be made.
I will say in all of the engagement activities, as well as on the city's website, as well as ours, I guess the rules of engagement are clear. The categories are clear. For individuals or entities that may be less familiar about those processes, that may not necessarily be understood. And so we reiterate it, and that's why every time we talk about ARPA, we go through those first 6 slides and we say the same thing. It must follow this X, Y, Z. Some folks may say it's repetitive, but it also helps the board sort of understand and be reminded of the rules, of the categories, of the compliance, because if we get ahead of ourselves and move in areas that aren't aligned, we are then on the hook for covering that expense. So we know that some may not understand, but we will continue to help individuals to understand the process and the guidelines and the framework, which on the back end is tested to ensure that expense can be applied to those funds. So we will continue to clarify that, but we do understand that some may not be as aware, and which is understandable because they're just not as familiar with these processes.
Thank you again, Manager Hager and Deborah and Jody for this presentation, and we will look for the next conversation about this. And commissioners, I'm sure, will be emailing you the questions, and we recommend that if they have any that can't wait until the next meeting.
Chair Harrington, Commissioner Carter, I don't know if you saw Commissioner Carter's hand up.
I'm going to have to move on. I understand that there are a lot of questions, but we have to move. It's after 2 o'clock already, and I've got 2 more things we've got to get done. So there is one item here that we need to suspend the rules to vote on. 21059, Dangerous Dog Appeal Board appointments. We need to motion to suspend the rules to vote to approve an additional 3-year term for the Dangerous Dog Appeal Board to be on that board. So can I have a motion to suspend the rules?
So moved.
Okay.
Seconded.
Been moved and properly second to suspend the rules to appoint Amo to the Dangerous Dog Appeals Board. Monica, we have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Alam.
Aye.
Commissioner Burns.
She's there someplace.
Commissioner Carter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Jacobs,
Aye.
and Chair Howerton.
I approve 5-0 to suspend the rules. Now I have can I get a motion to appoint her to the board? That's why I need a motion. I think that's where we go with it. Yeah. So I'd like to entertain a motion to appoint.
I move that we appoint Mo Truro to this board.
Seconded.
It's been moved and properly second to appoint Mo to the Dangerous Dog Appeals Board. We have a roll call vote, Monica.
Commissioner Alam.
Aye.
Commissioner Burns.
She said aye. I think her audio muted.
Okay. Commissioner Carter.
Said aye.
Commissioner Carter.
Aye, and I want to thank Mo for her service.
Vice Chair Jacobs.
Aye.
And Chair Howerton.
Aye, it's moved. It's been 5-0, moved and approved. Thank you. The only other two things were the commissioner directives. Were there anything that you needed to communicate to the board?
Good afternoon, Chair Howerton.
Yeah.
And commissioners, I think to save precious time, I'll just point out again that you all can access these anytime you like and send questions anytime you like, and your staff will attempt to answer them expeditiously.
Thank you, Drew. And commissioner comments, I'm sure we can wait on those to our next meeting. So if there's anything else that has to be covered at this moment.
I just have one question, Chair Howerton. I just wanted to ask Willie Darby if we have given him enough direction related to the TNVR issue.
So what?
The request that we had related to the county moving forward with the TNVR ordinance, whether I wanted to ask Attorney Darby if we've given him enough guidance.
Okay, Attorney Darby may not be here. If he doesn't have what he needs, I'm sure he will let us know, because I don't see him on the call.
Yes, Chair Howerton, it looks like he is not on the call, but I know he was on here during the discussion.
Yeah. Okay, so we can follow up with him, or the manager can follow up with him to see if he needs anything else. And okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
It's like robotic.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, thank you.
Yes, something's wrong with the volume. Okay, we had a motion to adjourn, so we are adjourned.